Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is June 5th, 2023, and we are here in part 2 of our interview with Rylee and JoCee Porter. Hi, guys.
Hello.
We just finished lunch. Rylee and JoCee Porter reached out to me after David Nielsen's 60 Minutes interview because the topic du jour of the past month or two has been Ensign Peak, the Mormon Church's, $150 plus billion, aggregation of assets under the Ensign Peak, and the Security and Exchange Commission's recent ruling declaring that the Mormon Church has been intentionally deceitful in its filings of documents related to its holdings, with the church now acknowledging that it was afraid that if the members knew how rich the Mormon Church was, then they might stop paying tithing, which is all problematic. Anyway, David Nielsen goes on 60 Minutes, tells his story as the Ensign Peak whistleblower, and then Rylee and JoCee Porter reach out to me and say, hey, we grew up connected to kind of Wall Street, white-collar Mormon stockbroker elites in New Jersey. And by the way, our dad, Jeff Porter, works for Ensign Peak and has for a long time. And we would love to share our perspectives. So we spent part 1 speaking mostly to Rylee about her experience as sort of the black sheep. And I use that term in air quotes, sort of feeling like she was the black sheep in her Mormon family that spent a lot of time in New Jersey and traveling around the U.S., but moving to Utah in kind of during her high school years in North Ogden. And we ended part 1 with Rylee talking about her eventual departure from the Mormon Church and just how that affected her relationship with her parents and just her own life. And I felt like it was a really beautiful ending where we kind of rehabilitated this narrative that she was a black sheep, and instead, in many ways, she was a pioneer, and in many ways, she was heroic, standing up for courage. JoCee grew up feeling like she was kind of Nephi, in a way, to Rylee's layman in their Mormon family. And so that's going to be part 2. If you haven't listened to Rylee's story, you should pause, go back and watch and listen to that, and then come back for JoCee's story in part 2. But that's what we're in store for. And then we hope to still have time for part 3, where both Rylee and JoCee are going to be talking about their insights and experiences having a dad who has worked for and continues to work for Ensign Peak, and any thoughts that they have. So it's kind of one of those epic family Mormon stories. And so, JoCee, we're excited for your Mormon story now.
Thank you. And I'm again, so good to be here. I thought I was Nephi. I really did. And I thought Rylee was so bad she was Layman and Lemuel, like combined. Like that's how bad of a black sheep she was. So do you want me to just start with being in Utah?
Yeah, let's start. Let's go back kind of how do you conceptualize your Mormon story beginning?
Yeah, well, I told the story previously how I met President Hinckley and had a great time in New Jersey as this Mormon, and it was all encompassing in my life up until this point. Like Mormonism was my life; they were my friends, and we were kind of switching schools because you switch schools a little bit more often back east. So I went to different pre-K and different they have a first and second grade. That's a different distinct school, and then third and fourth grade is a distinct school. So you switch schools a lot, and they're in different areas. So my friends were my classmates, my primary classmates, and so Mormonism was who I related to, and kind of was who I related to entire growing up. So when I came to Utah, I really thought it was a Layman and Lemuel, Nephi situation. My dad had this inspiration to come back to Utah, and we were going back to the chosen land as Lehi's dream and gonna do this great thing. And I was obviously the star of the story, so I'm Nephi. My brother is Sam, Samuel, right? That's the younger brother's name. That's my little brother, and so that's how I envisioned that.
And let me ask you, so As far as Rylee's acting out within your family context, for you, did that start back east?
Right.
Or did that mostly come on here from your vantage point?
Right. That's a good point. It didn't start back east, I don't think at all. It definitely started in Utah.
But you maybe just felt the most devout of your family member, of your siblings
The
at
most
the time?
important, definitely. I felt like I was the most important sibling.
Are you saying Nephi was something important?
I mean, I was the favorite. I'm not going to lie, okay? Because Nephi's the favorite. He's the middle. I felt that. But like my dad gave me Oreos growing up. He didn't give my siblings Oreos growing up. So clearly I was the favorite child. And that was very important to me, that I felt very important.
Maybe every Mormon kid thinks they're Nephi.
Probably. I hope so. They should. Everyone should feel like the hero. But no, looking back, and like I kind of relate the like Nephi story. That didn't like become into my vocabulary until like Rylee did start acting out. And that was kind of older, when I was like 14, 15 and looked at it. But moving to Utah was really tough for a lot of reasons. One, I kind of mentioned how like all of us were kind of bullied a little bit for being outcasts. But two, my dad was there. Right. And all growing up, he was not there. And like, I don't want to say that like he was absent, because he wasn't. He was just working so hard that like we just didn't see him. You know, he went to work before he got up. He was gone after he came back after we went to bed, you know? So that's just the life we live. Like, to just exemplify how hard he was working, I was born on a Saturday and on my parents' anniversary. The best anniversary present they ever got was my birth, right? Like, this is very lucky for them. And my dad wasn't there, right? He like went back to work the day I was born, on his anniversary, on a Saturday. That's just how hard he was working, right? But he still played a really big role in my life. But so when we came to Utah, my dad didn't have a job, right, for the first 4 months, because he was just, you know, in between positions. And so he was all of a sudden there, and I hated that. I did not want my dad to be around. Like, it was too little too late at that point, you know, like, it's like, yeah. I'm like 10, 11. I don't want to hang out with dad, you know, like he was there and I didn't want him there. And that was kind of a tough situation. But then I kind of got angry about it, because like, he was there all the time. He was very involved and a very active father figure at that time, I think, kind of making up for like lost opportunity in the New Jersey years. And then Rylee started acting out, and then like I lost his like attention, I suppose, and then hated Rylee for it, you know, because like he was so focused on her. I was like, well, like Rylee's acting out, and like now she gets all the attention, and that's unfair to me. And so that's kind of how I envisioned that. That's when the Laman Lemuel story kind of like, where I started like telling it, because it's not like this, I didn't come up with it today. You know, I've told that story many times. I was like, you were the Laman Lemuel, I was the Nephi.
First time I heard it, I think.
Yeah, well.
Which is perfect.
Yeah.
How Mormon-y was your home in terms of like scripture study and family prayer and family home evening and all that stuff?
Right. Very, very Mormon in a lot of sense. I mean, Rylee kind of started checking out at this time, but I didn't, right? And neither did my brother. And so we would kind of do things very active as a family, as an active family does. We would do family home evenings, and we did it in New Jersey. We did it in Utah. In fact, when my dad was living in New Jersey while we were still in Utah, every morning before my dad's work, so at like 6 a.m., we would get on a phone call, and we would read scriptures together as a family, like long distance. And we did this every single morning. Were you a part of this? Mm-mm. So me and my brother and my mom did this every single morning for 8 months while my dad was gone. And so like pretty devout for the most part. Like, and like there was like no desire to rebel. I mean, obviously we didn't fit in perfectly, but like it was still like the chosen people. These are the people I want to fit in. I'm young enough to like want to be this and to fit in and be this Utah Mormon. And I kind of became it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So the culture shock that Rylee talked about of like the brash, fast talking, intellectual Eastern culture that she kind of felt then culture shock coming into Utah. Did you experience similar culture shock or not as much?
Right. I think I did a little bit. Like, I think I was just I was angry. I was angry about moving to Utah. I was angry that people weren't who they said that they were. And like, I couldn't fully articulate why I was angry about it, or like what the cause was. But yeah, I think the correct term would be culture shock, that people didn't fit in. They didn't accept me. And like, they were mean, if that makes sense. And that's probably what I like internalized the most as like a 11-year-old kid, was just I felt like people were meaner than they were in New York, right? Like, which is a funny thing to say because like New York's not known for being kind. So like they just felt meaner. And so, but I quickly like made myself fit in, right? And so like I was doing the church things, right? I was looking how I needed to look to fit in, and I did fit in for the most part. I participated in Young Women's at that point because I started Young Women's in Utah, and fully participated to the full extent, was there volunteering, but some of it didn't sit right with me, and I think that's because like we were encouraged to like, I saw that like there was like an otherness. I saw that people from other religions weren't appreciated, or I saw that like they were talked down to, or like I even saw people that like would hate Mormons. And that was kind of like weird because I was like, well, aren't you? Like you go to church, but like you're talking so badly about it. Like this is very strange. I'm not sure what's going on. So it was a very confusing time to say the least.
Self-effacing Mormonism.
Yeah.
I totally get what you're saying. Yeah. Where you didn't wear it like a badge of honor.
Right.
It was like kind of,
Or you'd pretend to not be Mormon. I remember like that would be like, oh, you're Mormon. And you'd be like, no, I'm not. Or like, well, I would never say that. But like other people would say that. And I'd be like, why are you pretending not to be this thing? And then it's like, oh, like it made sense looking back, but I didn't get it at the time. I was just very confused because this was not how I was raised as a Mormon. I was raised a different way, and to love my religion, to embellish it on all aspects of my personality and of myself, but to also love people like who looked different than me and who acted different, and to not exclude people. But yeah.
Okay. So how did you cope and process and respond to that culture shock?
Right. Well, I quickly blended in, right? So like
You assimilated.
I assimilated, and I became mean, right? I became the mean Mormon that they were, right? Like, and I became cliquey, right? And I became exactly what I didn't like because I wanted to fit in so bad. And again, this is like 11, 12, but I think I was a mean 11, 12, 13, 14, maybe even up to like 17-year-old, just like fitting in and just being like elitist. This is what I need to do to fit in. I walk the walk, I talk the talk, I can say the testimony the correct way, but it still didn't feel perfectly natural to me because like I was still an outsider in a lot of ways. Like I think there was like people didn't fully accept me as being this Mormon, even though I wanted to be so bad, you know.
And maybe it felt inauthentic.
Yeah. And it's hard to explain, like, but yeah,
no,
complex feelings. But yeah, so I guess like in like informative years. And so I did the things, I checked the boxes. I was the only one that graduated seminary. I got my patriarchal blessing, right? I had the callings, right, that I participated in. But
Presidency, class, like
right, like Beehive, My Maid, and Laurels, right? Like, and I went to girls' camp, and I shamed my sister for not being Mormon. Like everything I thought I needed to do to fit in. But then in some ways I didn't, right? Because like as a natural teenager, you like I guess become a Jack Mormon, right? So I eventually became a Jack Mormon, natural, just like curiosity about different things, and so things. And also, I was always kind of encouraged to question authority, right? So like I would like question things and be like, this isn't right. This isn't, show me the scripture that tells me to hate you, you know, like just kind of frustration in a lot of ways. And so I became like a Jack Mormon, just kind of confused, but still wanted to fit in so bad.
Like I think a Jack Mormon is someone who drinks beer and who...
Yeah, so I definitely wasn't like that. I guess like I was like, I don't know, had a boyfriend in high school, and my boyfriend in high school he wasn't Mormon. And that was a big deal to like have this non-Mormon high school boyfriend. In fact, it was such a big deal that like my friend group, they stopped being my friends. It was like they legit went out of their way and they stopped being my friends. And then I asked them about it because, you know, you confront these things. I'm like, what? And they're like, we just think that you're growing apart and you're doing things we don't believe in, right? And they said this, and they've now have reached out and apologized at this point. But like they said that, and they disowned me the moment I had a non-Mormon boyfriend.
It was a non-Mormon boyfriend.
It was a non-Mormon boyfriend, which, you know, and they had boyfriends too. They were just Mormon. Like that was like the sin was the non-Mormonness of the boyfriend, which is unfortunate because he was a great guy. He was a genuine gem of a human being, you know, but because he wasn't Mormon, he didn't get the stamp of approval that should have been granted. Anyone who's just a good person should have got that stamp of approval.
But it sounds like you're really experiencing how thin a line, there is between, and how quickly you can get flipped onto being ostracized, socially ostracized, right? How quickly that happens. How, yeah.
No,
I don't think our kids ever learned to fit in their Mormon high schools. Never. I don't think any of them did. All 4 never figured it out.
An impossible balancing act, right?
But I wanted to so bad. I really did. And I wanted people to like acknowledge that, like, I claim that I'm the only one that graduates seminary, because that was important to me, that I was the only one of the 3 kids to graduate seminary, not because I thought that seminary was useful, but because I did the right things. I took the right steps. I was doing the right things. Look at me kind of situation. And so and I fit into structural norms that my sister wasn't able to. And so I thrived and did pretty well in these environments, while also being sad on the inside, if that kind of makes sense.
Sad what?
I don't know. It was just like, I struggled with anxiety a lot growing up as a child. And so I struggled emotionally and wasn't happy, but I still got straight A's, right? So no one knew in a lot of sense. And I look back now and I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah, this was a hurt child, as maybe all children are hurt, but certainly went through that progression and then being kind of ostracized because I had this boyfriend who was such a great guy. And it was always kind of framed where it's you're not Mormon, this is going to end, right? You couldn't fully embrace just your first love, which is kind of unfortunate, you couldn't just be so excited, just being so in love and with someone that, you can just hang out with and have a great time with. And we were over 16, so it wasn't as big of a deal as it would have been. But yeah, there was always an end date where it's well, how long do you think we'll be together? And it's well, it can't be forever because you're not Mormon, right? We have to break up at one point, and so this is just, it's gonna end. And that, I think that's kind of tragic that you couldn't experience fully your first love in a real way.
How did you justify identifying with Nephi? How did you justify sort of this, and this is all believing Mormon, rebellion in Utah is having a non-Mormon boyfriend. That's so insane, right? But in your mind, conceptualizing of yourself as a Nephi, how did you justify having a boyfriend at all, let alone a non-Mormon boyfriend?
And I don't think our family was ever you can't date non-Mormons. That was never the narrative that was really taught. It was just
well, because we believed in inclusivity. I don't think it shocked my parents at all that she had it was just she was ostracized by her Mormon friends.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So how did I justify it? I thought I was doing the better thing, right? I was I can see above just the elite, because I look at some guys and they're not great and they're bad people, but they're Mormon. And it's but I found this great person who wasn't Mormon, and I can see above what you guys will get there. Was probably how I viewed it, and thought that I was
more Christ-like.
Exactly. Okay. More proud of that and of that experience in a lot of ways. But yeah, it wasn't accepted within my friend group at all, and definitely not accepted within the bishop once he found out, right? It was not a
what
happy
constant.
He wasn't into it, right? And it was kind of always the conversation was well, how do you get to temple marriage? Where's the temple marriage at, right? Not where's the happy marriage? Where's the healthy marriage? I'm not sure why I'm talking about marriage as a 16-year-old.
What age is this? I was going to say, let's take a pause to talk about that. An adult male is asking a teenager what her marital plans are because her current high school sweetheart
isn't Mormon.
Is not a Mormon.
But and the young women leaders were like that too, right? Because it's not I was secretly dating this guy. It was over for a year, over a year, maybe a year and a half, in 16, 17. Those are big years. And so people knew, but yeah, I was always just well, you got to get married in the temple. So you got to figure that out. Have fun now, but you got to figure out the temple thing and don't ruin yourself for the temple. I know he's not Mormon. He'll be a bad influence on you. You'll probably have sex at a time, but just so you know, be ready for the temple. And that was kind of always how it was framed by all the adult leaders within the church, but not my parents, right? My parents, I don't think we're being have fully healthy exploration, but they were certainly never you shouldn't date him because he's not Mormon. But that's how it was for the church, for the word, for the young women leaders, for the bishop.
Well, and also how inappropriate, because if my parents who were her parents had no problem with it, then that is totally misplaced for people to feel like they have an opinion. But if I may, I recognize how JoCee internalized a lot of this messaging that she's talking about, because she spoke about, there was like a resentment between us because she was able to code switch, and like I couldn't live inauthentically what I felt like was living inauthentically. So it was like right when like Instagram or Facebook was new, and she posted a picture of the temple, and I knew she had this non-Mormon boyfriend, and the caption was, and I laugh about it to this day. Do you want to tell them what the caption is?
If this isn't your castle, then you're not my prince.
If this isn't your castle, you're not my prince.
And I was like, a non-Mormon boyfriend. Oh, I'm sure that broke his heart.
So she's like internalizing these like really conflicting messages all of the time while trying to seek validation that I feel like middle children never feel like they get, especially when like I took a lot of attention. Our younger brother is like the only boy, and JoCee's accomplishing achievement after achievement. Like I remember she was putting her report cards on the fridge
to get attention.
And
I covered the fridge in like all the awards I got
Classic
that year.
Middle child vibes.
Classic. Just wanting attention so
participated in sports.
Right. And I was the only one to participate in sports, which like my parents love sports, or like my dad especially loves sports. I was the only one that did sports in high school. I played basketball. Yeah. Right. And you know, my dad went to every single game, right? That's how important it was. And like I wanted my dad and my parents and everyone to like me so much that I did the steps, right? And that was how I did that. Well, internalizing very complex messages, as
conflicting.
Yeah.
So we mentioned last episode that, you know, now you work in tech, you're a computer programmer, you're really big into the idea of women in STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah.
And you've got, we should have mentioned codepretty.tech, your website, and JoCee.holiday on Instagram, where you're sort of a public advocate for women professionals in tech specifically and in science, right?
Yes.
So I have to ask, growing up in a traditional Mormon household, what were you thinking about gender roles? What were you thinking about your mom being a stay-at-home mom, your dad being a hyper white-collar professional that was like gone all the time? And like, how were you thinking about your future at the time professionally, or were you? And I'm talking kind of these middle school years or high school years.
Right. And I think, I'm glad that you brought this up, because I think gender roles plays like a huge part into my story, where like my sister didn't experience the gender roles in her experience growing up in New York. And that's, I felt like, was so hammered into me so much in very detrimental ways, both within my family, within the church, and the broader ecosystem, right? And so I think like I was always like knew that I would, you know, go to college, but not to get a college degree, just in case my husband died, right? That's why I was going to college, right? And I wasn't going to college, you know, to like become the breadwinner. I was going to college to meet someone that was intellectually curious like I was. And that was so ingrained into like how I perceived the world. So like the fact that I got into STEM is interesting, because I don't think anyone was like, hey, you should pursue engineering. They weren't. In fact, they were like, hey, you should pursue teaching. And so my senior year of high school, I dropped out every other day. I didn't drop out, but I did a internship, and I did the longest internship available, which is an every other day internship, to do student teaching at the local elementary school, because my young woman leader asked me to do that. And so I didn't go to AP classes, right? I didn't go to like any of these complex or interesting classes. I went and I taught second grade with this lovely lady in this lovely classroom, and had great experiences to it. But that was not where I should have been, right? I think I wish people looked at me and was like, she's smart, you know, she deserves to be here.
Did you have an interest in tech and STEM and science in middle and high school?
I think I really did. I did a Sudoku a day my like entire like high school years, like maybe show how like nerdy I am. And I still do Sudokus a day. I like, and you know, and we grew up readers, right? I remember growing up, I wouldn't get punished by like grounding from friends, because that wasn't a real punishment. We would get grounded from our books, right? This is how like integrated into reading that we were. And reading was such a great part of my life. And I never had any restrictions on reading. I like probably picked up books that I probably shouldn't have picked up, like all through all years because I would just read, and I loved to read. So yeah, I think I was like an obviously intellectually curious person. And I wish that was seen. And so I internalized a lot of messaging that I wish that I didn't. And that was really frustrating, especially because my brother, who was just a year and a half younger than me, he got that push for engineering, for like math, being like, oh, you're so smart, where JoCee's so pretty, he's so smart, and that was certainly the narrative that I felt like was told by a lot of people. And those gender roles were like hammered into it.
So your Mormon experience in North Ogden, Utah was not, oh, wow, she's into math and tech, she can become a scientist or an engineer. It was maybe you could become a school teacher so that you have a backup career if you end up getting divorced from your professional husband. Is that right?
Right, absolutely.
Okay.
And which is frustrating. Or like, I think, and I don't think I was discouraged from like science and engineering stuff, but it was considered a hobby in a lot of ways. They'd be like, oh, you do Sudokus all the time? That's cute. Instead of being like, oh, a budding engineer, like it was like, that's a cute hobby. But when you have kids and like when your real career comes along, you'll have to put that aside for your husband. That was absolutely I felt the narrative was that I got growing up. And but so I did kind of like find things that I was interested in. And so I did like get a few scholarships. So I went to college, and like, again, it's not like they were like telling me not to go into engineering, but they weren't like, JoCee, go into engineering. I was just kind of like, oh, I'm interested in this. I think I'm going to go into engineering. So I did.
Once you got to the U.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, before we jump there, let's talk about your faith development in high school.
Okay.
Was your testimony pretty orthodox? Was it pretty literalistic? Did it,
Right.
Did you have doubts and questions? Were you all in? And to what extent were you aware of Rylee's sort of like disaffection from the church, and even the doubts and questions she was having? And how were you processing all of that? Plus, was the distress that Rylee was sort of, I don't want to say causing, but experiencing with your parents during her black sheep years, was that visible to you? And if so, was that helping to shape your high school experience?
Yes, in a lot of ways, I'm so glad I was not an older child. I think being a middle child sucks. I really do. But I do not envy being the oldest child. Because, I saw what she went through, and I knew that was not what I would go through. I knew that I would not be that person, that I did not want to be the enemy. I did not want to be the person that destroyed the family so we wouldn't have salvation. I did not want to be that, because she caused so many issues. And as I didn't perceive what she was actually going through as a child, I was just like, she's not following the rules. Like, and that's not okay with me.
And
that
JoCee was great at following the rules.
I did well at following the rules, and I followed the rules, and I succeeded, but I wasn't getting the attention for following the rules, and that didn't feel well for me. So I saw what she did. But so where was my testimony? So like, I obviously was going through normal teenage curiosity kind of situations, but like, I felt like I was pretty strong in my beliefs, and kind of an elitist kind of way, right? I feel like I came from the New York narrative where it's like, I knew the Book of Mormon, and we were prideful or very proud that we knew the Book of Mormon really well, and that's where our beliefs stem from. They stem from doctrine, not culture, right? And so our family was quick to separate doctrine from culture and kind of dismiss the culture, right? Without realizing that your 12-year-old daughter is going to internalize that culture, right? So like, we would often be like, oh, that's just culture, ignore that. But the doctrine is this, and the doctrine is great.
Tell me if you heard this saying that the gospel's true, but the culture isn't, or something like that.
Right.
I don't know.
And like, the people are
something
wrong, but the church is true kind of situation.
Yeah. That people make mistakes, but the gospel is perfect.
Right.
So sorry that
All
these
the
people
time.
make mistakes. And I think that's where also my parents like failed to recognize like how influential to and also detrimental these cultural stories that were being told to my sister over and over and over again, because like, that's not what they were necessarily saying at home,
Right. And this is like a frustrating point, because like, I'll like bring this up to my family. I'll be like, I don't feel like I was encouraged to go into engineering. They're like, well, you're an engineer, so clearly someone encouraged you. And it's like, yeah, okay.
Well, and she was supported in all of her pursuits. I was
always supported, but I had to find them, right? Which is not how it was for my brother. They found them for my brother, right? And I struggled bringing Jackson into this because I know that he struggles being like the golden child, and that's kind of some ways that I feel. And it's not his fault to be the golden child. He doesn't want that
West
position.
Point, right?
He's at West
Yeah,
Point.
just barely graduated West Point.
Which we're super, like
incredible.
hoorah, good for him.
Yep, after the
Super
mission in
proud.
Armenia.
Yeah.
So
And he's very successful and accomplished and easy to talk about.
incredibly intelligent.
So intelligent. And I feel like that in a lot of ways overshadowed like their daughter, who was also
Just as intelligent.
So just to be clear, you're happy for your brother, but
Right.
you're both reflective on how Mormon culture, which by the way is
Treated us
shaped by the
different.
doctrine and the theology,
Right.
how Mormon culture probably maybe didn't prepare both of you, but right now you specifically, JoCee, maybe to live the full potential that you otherwise could have lived.
Absolutely,
that right?
absolutely. And like there's like some pretty like concrete evidence of this, right? So my brother and I are 16 months apart, and like he got a great ACT score, I think perfect, right? And I got a 25 ACT score, right? Or 28, something that's like fine, but like not anything to brag about. He got private tutors to get that perfect ACT score.
Well, because originally his score
wasn't good.
Yeah, originally it was like a 27, 28.
In, like, one
maybe
area.
it was like, I think he just struggled in writing specifically.
Right.
But
they knew he was intelligent and they knew he needed to go to a good school. So they hired a private tutor to come and train him up to get the great ACT score that he eventually got. And he's smart and should get that ACT score. Me, just 16 months or 18 months older than he was, I didn't get that, right? And it's like, well, why didn't you do that for your daughter when you did for your son? When they're basically a year and a half apart, like there should have been... If you're going to do it for one, you should do it for the other. And Jackson took the ACT in the MTC, so it was after high school, right? So it's not like they were doing this when he was 16 and JoCee was already in college, right? They were doing this anyway. Like they could have done it for me, and they didn't. And I think that's a failure on that.
And maybe it's because in Mormonism, women are supposed to find their priesthood holder, get
Absolutely.
married, and become moms.
Right, and I don't know why it was. Maybe they thought I was dumber and just didn't need it, and it'd be a waste
I don't
of
think
my.
that they thought you were dumber.
Let me talk. Maybe they thought I was dumber. Maybe they just honestly didn't think about it, and then like it's like a sin of omission for just not considering it. Maybe they like just internalized the messaging that like JoCee wasn't interested into this, or maybe like they really just followed the culture rules where it's like, she deserves to be, she'll be a wife and that will make her happy, and she wants to teach elementary education or something. All of those are not good reasons, right? It shouldn't have happened.
Okay.
Well, I just want to clarify. I mean, I just don't think anyone thought JoCee was dumb. No
Right.
one thought JoCee was dumb or incapable, I guess is the distinction I
But
want to
I am
make.
hearing from you a little bit of like a narrative that was told, or let's just say a role assignment within the family, that you were the pretty one and he was smart.
And that I love kids. I honestly love children, and I'm really good at babysitting, and I have always kind of just been drawn to children, and they kind of just assign that gender role because of that interest in children,
yes.
right? So it's like, oh, JoCee's just going to have 10 kids, right? Which I think I said I was going to have 10 kids until the age of 12, and then that narrative stopped out pretty young, but like that, they perpetuated that. And yeah, I think that they were like, yeah, JoCee doesn't care about college or isn't interested in college because they decided that for me.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you a little bit, correct me if I'm wrong, is an adaptability, some might say people pleasing, of you showing up to get your needs met, to feel seen, valued, or let's just say an attempt to, meaning what you want me to be, I can be. Right? Whatever it takes for me to kind of be seen in this moment, to feel valued. Does that seem right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would like absolutely explain it. It's like I became who I needed to be to please people for sure, or to look good. Yeah.
So can I ask, you mentioned sad, right? That on some level you were doing all the things. You were, in sports and you were getting good grades, but you were also sad. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you mean by that and how that showed up?
Yeah, I mean, I call them the dark years, and I did kind of talk extensively about this on Breaking Down Patriarchy, that podcast, if anyone wants the details of this, by Amy
McPhee Olivest.
Amy McPhee Olivest.
Shout out to Amy McPhee Olivest.
She's
We love breaking down patriarchy?
She's incredible. And so she did let me share this story to talk more about these dark years that I'll give a brief explanation of. But yeah, I consider them the dark years. So I was playing sports and like was doing really well. And then like for some reason that wasn't working any longer. And so I quit. I up and quit, just like randomly basketball. I was like, coach, here you go. Like didn't think about it. And I was just like, I'm done. I am done. And I quit and I stopped. And this is kind of like when I stopped like going to school, you know, like, and I not like going to school when I stopped taking the AP classes and instead I took like the easy classes and I like did the elementary internship, right? Like I like was like, this isn't working out. So I totally stopped. And like, that was also when I was like in the midst of talking to the bishop, right? And like became like, he, you know, I was having sex and he knew about the having sex and I felt very shamed for it while also wanting to be this role that I wasn't able to be in a lot of ways. So yeah, those are the dark years.
Okay, wait. I'm really sorry that happened. So you just said you were having sex?
Yeah. So when I was 16, I was having sex.
Oh.
Which is a shock because Rylee wasn't, which people thought she
who's
was.
Who's the black sheep here and who's Nephi?
Right.
Isn't it funny?
I switched a lot better. I context switched a lot better than she did, you know.
Well, and part of Mormonism is what it looks like.
Right.
And so you can pick up that it's more about what you show as opposed to...
Yeah, so again, for the listeners and viewers, this whole Nephi and layman and this whole black sheep and like, it's all bad constructs. So I use them very loosely. But I'm going to use it now and say, how does Nephi come to the point of having sex in high school in a predominantly faithful Mormon community?
Right.
After knowing that her older sister had caused so much distress and sadness in the family by, quote, being a black sheep. So take us through how that happened.
Right. And so very naturally, in a very loving way.
Yeah. Like how it happens for pretty much all teens across the country.
Like with someone with a great loving boyfriend, like a very natural progression.
So this is with the non-Mormon boyfriend.
Yeah.
So like
this is when that
their
started.
fears came true.
Yeah,
so
their fears came true. Yeah. What they were telling me to not do is exactly what I was doing.
Going steady.
I mean, it's like Rylee was openly rebellious, right? So my rebellion as a normal teenager had to be hidden and was very hidden. So I don't think I know my parents didn't know, right? I know that people didn't know. The bishop knew and I knew because I was doing it and that was it. And it was so hidden in so many ways and like, but I was not going to be Rylee and be openly rebellious. I wasn't going to go to parties. It was, if I was going to like grab some gum and you would not know in the morning, right? Like it was hidden.
Right.
So you would have tried alcohol, for example, in high school?
Oh, no, I never did. That was like an exaggeration.
Okay.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I wasn't even really going to parties, but you know.
And this is not to shame you, JoCee. This is just like, isn't it weird that sometimes the truth tellers get marginalized and punished and get labeled as bad, whereas you were more, and it's a system, it's neither of you, but it's a system. You were like kind of hiding and faking a little bit to be loved and accepted, and yet you were praised because you were able to create the impression of obedience and faithfulness. And you may have even been sincere about it and found a way to justify it. But I'm just noting the irony that Rylee was the black sheep, but she was not sexually active, but she was being demonized, so to speak. You were the, quote, Nephi, or the good kid, but you were sexually active and kind of lying and hiding about it. Again, no shame. It's just what this toxic purity culture does to us, right?
Right.
And a high demand religion, you know.
Right. It's such a good point. And like, and it was all about like how it looked, right? Versus like what it actually was. And again, these are like natural things to do as a teenager. And in every other culture.
In every other culture, yeah.
It's healthy.
Right. But it's not like there wasn't like so much internalized shame from it, right? It's not like I was like okay with it, you know, like this caused like some severe like depression where I was like, what did I just do? You know, I mean, like go bawling to the bishop and like read your scriptures way too much, right? To like kind of like compensate for it or become clean, or like I would like write up handwritten contracts that we wouldn't do it again, like things to just like not justify, put in these like just like
you feel like you had to earn back your salvation through like a really tremendous repentance process.
Okay, so you did confess to your bishop.
Yeah, so my bishop knew right away.
Medical doctor bishop?
Yeah.
No,
It switched by then.
Okay.
It was my basketball coach, and that's why I quit basketball, right? Because like at one point, like I became so like,
oh my goodness,
These boundaries.
Everywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So I was playing basketball, and like his daughter was one of my really good friends, and obviously that friendship ended when he became bishop and found out about this. And so,
well, no, obviously, people wouldn't assume that your, friends would isolate from you if they heard that you were going to the, bishop or whatever. And a lot of what JoCee was doing is like hiding in plain sight, right? Because if people were looking for the cultural markers that something might have been going on that was causing her stress at home, and to live in this dissonance was, well, JoCee wasn't taking the sacrament. Like we talked about that. It's like, how did mom and dad not know? Why were why were the questions being asked by the bishop in inappropriate ways?
Right.
So talk to us about those bishop conversations about your about law of chastity worthiness stuff, if you want to.
Right. And like they weren't like, I know some bishops are like openly inappropriate. He was very inappropriate, but not like to the point where you're like, oh my God, like this is very traumatic. My first sexual experience wasn't one that I wanted, right? And so like I want to like explain that I was having sex both that I wanted to have and also sex that I didn't want to have, right? And that the first few times was when I didn't want it, right? And so like, and I feel like there was like some assault, and then like now I have language for it that I didn't back then, right? And so like when I told my bishop, and it sucks that the bishop's like the first line of defense for these things, right? Like he knew but kind of didn't know that it was like not a good situation for me, and I didn't want to have sex with these people, and it wasn't non-consensual sex, and he kind of knew, didn't know, but the issue was that I had sex, not that like this poor girl was in a situation she shouldn't have been in and should have been protected. Hard. But I couldn't go to my parents and tell this, right? Because I had to keep up that facade, and so I went to him, and he wasn't able to provide the support, understandably, because he's not a child psychiatrist, right? There's no reason he should know how to do these things, but
and he's also completely untrained, and the word consent doesn't even exist in the Mormon vocabulary in 2023, right?
It doesn't exist almost at all, right? Like it's kind of a new concept, like idea of consent. So like all that was like talked about in those meetings was like, oh, you had sex again, not like, well, did you want to? Like, are you okay? Are you comfortable? Like, and if you're willingly having sex and you want to stop, that's one thing. But if you're in a bad situation, that's something different. Yes. And that wasn't ever like distinguished against. It was all about sex and just having sex of any kind, right? It's not like this was, this was on the way to sex at this point. And so that was kind of the narrative. And it was always like, how to stop. And so I went to the bishop for years and so I didn't take the sacrament at this entire time, but also hiding that, right? It's not like everyone knew. Yeah. No one knew.
How did you hide it, that you weren't taking the sacrament?
I would just like quickly like hide, put on like the thing, like put my like hoodie up, and just kind of like make myself small in that moment to pass it around. It's not like I was like pretending. I just like wouldn't openly show it, right? Or like be late for church. That was a good one. To just like not be there for that,
Did you have anxiety about that? Was that something that you thought about, how you were going to cover it up or dodge it on Sundays? Or was did you have kind of a, did it normalize?
I think it eventually normalized, where it was just like, okay, like whatever, But like at first it was certainly like, oh, I don't want anyone to know, and like the shame. But when you go through that shame for like 3-4 years, your entire teenage years, it's like, and like the only time I cleaned up was in time to get the patriarchal blessing, right? Did clean up for that, which, I think it was like 6 weeks was the goal or something like that. And so I did that. And then I got my patriarchal blessing and checked that box. And then felt super great about it, and then like, was naturally curious again, and then it kind of went downhill again, and the shame kind of comes back. And that was like for years. So like I remember the last time that I went to my bishop, and this is maybe jumping ahead, I was like 19. So I stayed in the family ward until I was 19. The very last time I went to him, like I was like, so I'm still having like sex with this boyfriend, And then he's like, well, do you want to marry him? And I was like, no, I don't. And he's like, well, maybe you should, so you stop having sex out of wedlock. It's like, so instead of encouraging a happy, healthy, and I said I did not want to marry him, the advice I got was to get married, to not have sex in the inappropriate way any longer, which is crazy.
Because that's what was so important.
That
it
was
was just,
so
it was
important.
of the utmost importance to not have premarital sex.
Right.
So how do we fix that equation?
Yeah.
And if that includes getting married to the wrong person, then maybe
So
that's
be it.
your natural consequence. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so messed up. And the bishops are victims because the Mormon church, even though it's worth $250 billion, it brags that it has a lay clergy, and it doesn't train, it doesn't educate or really train its bishops. It just throws them in there. They might be a plumber, they might be a accountant or a stockbroker,
Right.
but they don't know how to counsel a teenage girl about
Right.
consent and healthy sexuality and marriage.
Right.
They're just going to teach the 16 or 19-year-old whatever they learned from whatever Boyd K. Packer or Spencer W. Kimball said, 30 years ago when, as like post-war boomer prophets, right?
Right. And I feel like there's like a big missed opportunity actually with this, right? Because my 3 years I was going to the bishop like every 3 weeks or something like that.
Wow.
And he was an engineer, right? And so we would talk about how much I like Sudokus, and I would bring a book to sit outside of his office, right, every single time. And like the books that I'd reading, I feel like would be pretty obvious that JoCee's like very intellectually curious. What a great mentor opportunity to be like, oh, so what do you think about for college? Like, what do you want to do? And that was never. It was always like your female role, and by the way, don't have sex. Like, but you got to at one point, like you're gonna get married, so you might as well do it now, so you're not having sex inappropriately. Like, it was such a missed opportunity for him to like mentor some curious, intellectually interesting woman in his clergy.
It was also like that reinforcement of
Right.
where your value was.
Right.
Right? Where it's
Right.
just like, but purity.
Reproductive.
Right.
Like
But
a
purity.
Yeah.
But stay
Right.
pure, pure until you're married, and then
Like a Mormon
true.
woman's primary value to society is in reproduction. Am I wrong?
Right. Absolutely. And like,
I'm wrong?
and how to,
Or-
no, you're not wrong.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree with what
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, and it's like how you support your spouse, right? Like that's like the big thing. And it's how you support the priesthood holder in the house. Like you're never going to hold the priesthood, but you can support the priesthood holder in different ways. And that was what was taught. And it's always challenging talking about like having sex as like a high schooler, because you get so discredited, right? Like I can like be this great person that was like very intellectually curious, but it's like, and interested in the church and also read the scriptures and also like wanted to be involved in a lot of ways, but like it's like, oh well, you're a bad person.
Yeah, this outsized energy that surrounds the fact that she's a sexually active teenager that absolutely blinds them or makes their view myopic to this is an intellectually curious, scientifically minded,
Developmentally appropriate.
Exactly,
Right.
because there's
Stage.
so much emphasis on the sex outside of marriage that, like JoCee said, there's an absolute missed opportunity and for mentorship in a lot of different places. And she spoke to this before where like she had to find her own internships. And that to me is what I'd love to hear you speak more about, because she went to find these things herself.
Yeah.
Really quick, before we jump to that, like, we entered this branch in the conversation where you were talking about your dark years.
Yeah.
And, we add to it for the never Mormons who watch and listen to Mormon stories, add to it the teaching within Mormonism that sex out of wedlock is a sin next to murder.
Right.
You would have been taught that growing up.
Right.
I want to know what it's like to be in sort of the law of chastity, bishop-based repentance shame parade. For how many years were you in that shame parade?
3. Yeah. 3
Where you're not
years.
taking the sacrament and feeling shamed and confessing
Right.
to the bishop, and he's asking you about your sex life as a teenage girl alone in a room one-on-one, and then you're feeling 3 years of feeling like you're committing the sin next to murder
Right.
while you're hiding and lying to your parents.
Right.
What is talk about your dark years? That sounds like a recipe for some dark years.
Right. And that's why it was the dark years, right? So it's like, that's why it's like I quit basketball because the bishop was the basketball coach. Like, and he wasn't like the active coach at that point. I had kind of graduated beyond it, but he was still like very involved in the basketball scene. And so it's like, I had to get away from it, like it just wasn't working any longer.
But what about the 3 years of guilt and shame?
So much guilt and so much shame and so much like, I don't even know how to explain it. Like you just kind of like become small and like hide in a lot of ways, right? So like I would start bringing books to church and I would just like read in between like meetings because I didn't want anyone to talk to me, but I still wanted to be there in a lot of ways because I wanted to be accepted and fit in so badly. But so much, and you do good and then you do bad and then like it's like you don't get any credit for doing good because you did the bad again, right? You don't get any credit for progressing, or you don't get any credit for like finding something that you find interesting or having a growing testimony or like trying to still even build a testimony while like you're doing these bad things because it's so overshadowed that like you're sexually active.
But your parents didn't know, right?
Okay, so I told them, but they claim to not know. So this is kind of, we'll have to maybe ask them one of these times. But I know for a fact that I told them when I was 16 that I was having sex. And then like now that I'm 27, when we talk about it, they're like, what?
They don't remember.
Yeah.
Okay.
Selective
What was their
memory.
response at the time that you remember?
Right. I told my mom, and then she and I went and had dinner the next night. And it wasn't a good response. It was kind of just like, well, like, bad things happen when you have sex. And then she was like, and you didn't get the HPV vaccine. So like, you need to be extra careful, instead of like being like, we should probably get you the HPV vaccine at that point.
Or let's talk about how you're feeling.
Right.
Or was it consensual?
And I wish that someone said that, right? Because the first time it wasn't, right? And like, and I was young and I wish someone was like, are you okay? Like, what happened? But that never happened. So, but it was always like, this is bad. What you're doing is bad. And you need to stop, instead of being like, okay, you're in a healthy relationship. It's likely not going to stop, like, and let's make sure that it's safe instead.
Yeah. Yeah.
But on the flip side, what you didn't get is you're a horrible, dirty, bad
Right.
person and you're awful and you need to stop and we're going to ground you for 3 years and make you break
Right.
up with your boyfriend. So, I mean, they could have given the super orthodox
Right.
response to you and they didn't.
They didn't. No, it was just like they kind of added to that shame as all, like the cultural shame or like the
Yeah.
emotional shame. But it's not like they were like, oh, by the way, you can't see him ever again. They weren't going to try and control it or anything. Like they didn't try and control it, right? Like it still happened, and
They didn't ground her.
they didn't ground
Right.
me. And I was still allowed to read books the next day. So I imagine it wasn't grounded from the books either, like it was.
But I am sensing from you that you were giving yourself those
Right. I was
judgments, though.
absolutely punishing myself in a lot of ways. And I didn't have the word for it back then, but now I like scrupulosity is the word.
Scrupulosity.
Yeah, like where I'd like overemphasize different things and try and read. Overcompensate, try and read the scriptures way more. I would over participate in seminary for a while. I would over participate in like these like my maid callings and be there. And even though like I felt awkward and didn't like, I was told that I wasn't a good person or whatever, I still tried to compensate in a lot of ways and would still try and bear my testimony as much as possible. Yeah.
I cannot imagine trying to be an Orthodox Mormon youth teenager and being sexually active. That would have chewed me up. And I'm not saying that in like a judgmental or condescending way. It's just, I think the guilt would have eaten me alive.
Yeah, well, eventually I found the story of Alma the Younger, right? So like I was reading the scriptures and really internalized them in a lot of ways. And I was like, Alma the Younger, he was doing bad things, but became this great thing. So that was kind of my like redemption kind of like hope, was like Alma the Younger did things way worse than me and became this great spiritual powerhouse. That's going to be me. That's who I'm going to become. So I went from Nephi to Alma the Younger, like at that experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think what's so interesting about the Nephi, Laman, Lemuel kind of that story is it's sort of like they both lose. They both lose. Nephi loses too. Like there's pressure in Nephi.
Right.
There's like so much effort to be Nephi.
Right.
There's clearly a lot of self-betraying in being Nephi because you're showing up for whatever, the parent or God or whoever they want you to be. So it's like everyone loses
and you're
in this
lying
story.
and you're hiding things.
Killing in the name of, right?
Yeah.
Let's not forget that
became a
Nephi was a
murderer.
murderer.
Right.
It is better that one man perish.
Right.
Yeah.
But
what
there's probably some metaphorical killing of yourself
Right.
by trying to be something for somebody
all
else and
these-
hiding who you are.
That's what I'm
and
hearing in you.
denying
It's just
your
like
own desires. Like there's probably some even metaphor there with the Laban thing.
I just think what I'm hearing is like, it's so tiring. It's so like you're working so hard. That's what I'm hearing from you. It's just how exhausting it is this whole repentance wheel that you're placed on, but also in this sort of in your family role of like, what do I have to do around here to be noticed, to be recognized, you know? And you going out for all the things and doing all the things. And, you know, that's what I see from you is just like so much earnestness and like high effort. Did it feel that way? I mean, do you remember feeling like this sense of like what it took to be this self that people approved of? Mm-hmm. You know, to kind of give yourself whatever love you got there, whatever approval you got there. Do you remember like how you felt during that time? If it was just like this is exhausting.
Right. And it was doable for a while. That's why like the day I quit basketball, I up and quit, right? Like one time I was just like, I can't anymore. And like, that's when I like shut down, you know, as like a person, you know, in a lot of different ways, and like started just like wearing sweats every single day, you know, because it's like, I can't keep doing this. And that was like, like a little bit further in high school, right? So I had been trying for so long to keep up this facade, and it didn't work towards the end. And so the end, it's just kind of like gave up, you know, needed to quit. Which is disappointing because like
you're like, I'm out.
I liked basketball, you know, like I shouldn't have quit, you know, I shouldn't have felt like I needed to.
And having a healthy sexual experience that was exploratory with a boy you loved, that could have been an amazing, healthy, positive, happy, formative, good experience.
Right. And honestly, like
first love.
As an adult, I'm so glad that that's who my first experience was with, right? And he loved me, right? That's so important, and like showed me how to love myself in ways that like I couldn't, or like how to have a healthy, happy sexual relationship. And maybe a little young, sure, but like I'm so glad it happened, because if it would have been in the constraints of how Mormonism kind of introduces you to sex, I don't think it would have been healthy. Yeah. So I'm glad it happened. It was really hard, but it was really hard to be on that. But I did eventually give up one day and stop trying to be like the perfect Mormon child, you know?
Well, I just want to know, there's a saying in Buddhism that negative labels are like rusty chains, but positive labels are golden chains, but they're both chains. And I just want to note how much you suffered, Rylee, by being labeled as the, you know, as the black sheep?
Sure.
But you were suffering too, trying to carry the label of Nephi. All the labels are harmful, good and bad.
Right.
Right?
Right. No, it's such a good point. It's such a good point. And it's like to just not be able to be your authentic self, or just be who you want to be, and having to pretend to be someone different is exhausting.
I have a question around when you kind of did that, I'm out, I'm not. Did your parents, is this something?
Of basketball, you mean?
Yeah, with basketball. And you kind of saying, oh, and then I started wearing sweats and I started, right, kind of being different, showing up in a way that was different from before. I'm curious if your parents ever caught on when that change happened, and, you know, kind of how alone were you able to talk to your boyfriend in a way that was connecting to you? Like, did you feel alone even then?
Right. I mean, and eventually my boyfriend and I broke up. So like when like the dark years kind of started, we had broken up at this point, right? So it was like further along in high school. I dated him my first 2 years of high school. This is kind of the third year of high school, and I was just like, I'm done. And yes, my dad did notice, right? So like I quit basketball, but he took me to every single game across the entire state, to every single high school. So like he really showed up for me in a lot of ways. Like, and he was there, and like he couldn't be what I needed him to be, or he couldn't like approach the sexual conversations in ways that I wish he had, or like asked me like, were you sexually assaulted? Okay, let's talk about that. But he was there, you know, when I needed him at that time, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Was it ever an option in your mind? Like, one of the things that Rylee was able to do was to kind of say, something's rotten here. And I don't know exactly what it is. And it wasn't until Rylee went to college and started studying Mormon church history where she was able to sort of put language to why she wanted to check out of Mormonism, but it's pretty clear Rylee felt Mormonism was toxic starting in high school and was sort of saying this system isn't good. It's not true and it's not good. Did you consider, because you were going through in some ways having a worse experience than Rylee was, but putting on the face of an Orthodox believer, was there any part of you that was open to the possibility that it just wasn't true?
Right.
It was toxic and harmful, and you just were going to check out of it and just live your best, most authentic life? Or did you feel bound to stay faithful, partly trying to be the anti-Rylee in the sense of not wanting to become a black sheep too, and not wanting to make your parents sad, and not wanting to become another black sheep in your family?
Right. No, honestly, I never considered leaving at this time. And that's why I'm like, I feel like people probably discredit the fact that like I truly wanted to be a good Mormon despite having sex, because they'll just like focus on the sex aspect of that, right? That I truly believed the entire time. I found reasons to keep believing in that, like, even though I wasn't able to follow it or I wasn't following it perfectly, like I knew in the future I would, right? That like I would figure it out and I would have a redemption arc somehow. And this is ultimately true. I'm not leaving. Like this is true. My parents believe it. Everyone believes it. You know, and I ate into that cultural soup where it's like the only way to have a happy marriage is to, you know, get married in the temple and to follow these steps and to get the patriarchal blessing and to go to seminary. I remember my young woman leader would be like, everyone that graduated from seminary has now had a temple marriage, and that's so great. And so like that's kind of where I was like, okay, and that's kind of what motivated me to graduate seminary in a lot of ways, because I was like, I need to get to the temple. That will save me. And like I'm like having sex, so I can't go to the temple right now. But I was like, I'm graduating seminary, and that will be the step that I need to get to the temple and figure it out and like clean myself up, because I truly believed, and like in a very academic way. Like I was very like I knew the scriptures really well, right? And but again, people would discredit that in a lot of ways. But I truly believed that the church was so true on so many levels, and there wasn't a doubt in my mind at this time that it wasn't true, or that this was actually the cause of my internal hurts.
Just that idea of clean myself up is so saddening to me. But the paradox of both your stories is just reinforcing to me that in a high demand religion, nobody's safe and nobody wins. It doesn't matter which side you choose, you're going to feel the guilt and shame and the rejection and the self-loathing. Even if you try and become Nephi, you're going to feel the self-loathing. You just get self-loathing. That is the formula.
It is part of it, I think. And I'm just going to push back a little bit on what you were saying about better or worse. You know, I think you intimated that one was worse than the other, and I just think they're all...
If I said that, I didn't mean it.
Oh, okay. That they're all just...
Worse in from the Mormon lens, right?
Oh, I didn't know. I just like in that, just saying that pain is pain, suffering is suffering.
Yeah.
And it feels like you both have had, you know, significant suffering while trying to kind of show up in a lens and within a bubble. Yeah.
You can't win. Everybody suffers.
Right.
That's right.
There's a cost for all. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
And it sounds like to me you truly believed in like the redemptive gospel of repentance, right?
I knew that I could become clean and
that she would
forgiven.
become clean. Given her certain acts, right? She could achieve it. She could win it.
Right.
Through certain acts, I'll eventually earn the right to feel clean.
Which makes sense with the scrupulosity then as well, right? Because that would be the key. And then your need is greater. Right? Or your perceived need.
No, like because it's like you learn vocabulary when you grow up, like you learn what consent is. But when I learned the vocabulary term of scrupulosity, I was like, oh my God,
That's what it was.
Yes.
Holy cow,
Yeah.
like this makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And now I can actually understand what was going on because I have a word for it.
Articulate my reality.
So like, and I learned that on Mormon stories, right? And so it wasn't until looking back that I had that term, and I was 25, you know, like, so.
And for those who don't know, I've done my master's thesis as a psychology PhD was on scrupulosity, which is religious-based obsessive compulsive disorder. It's hyper-religiosity within a religious context as an anxiety disorder. But people just conceptualize it as super righteousness or super faithfulness, when in reality it can be a literal, you know, distressing, severe anxiety disorder.
Right.
that can cause all sorts of serious problems. And it's very prevalent in high demand religions like Orthodox Judaism, like devout Islam, and like Mormonism.
Yeah.
Okay, so anything else about your high school years before we go to college? You said you did graduate from seminary.
I graduated from seminary. Yeah, that was my key to the kingdom. No, nothing that, just like my senior year, I didn't attend schools. I started student teaching basically, and that's kind of what my focus was but I was still curious. And so I was still very curious, I guess is the only thing I'd say.
Do you have, I'm just injecting this narrative, but like I'm thinking about all your New Jersey peers
Right.
in these white collar Mormon elites. Did either of you start seeing your peers from New Jersey start going off to Ivy League schools or BYU, like, you know, and did you ever contrast or compare yourself to how your journeys ended up being, moving to North Ogden and not following that white collar Wall Street, New York, New Jersey kind of lifestyle, or not?
No, yeah. I mean, I saw all my peers go to great schools, Like Brown was a big one because it was, you know, New Jersey, and you get into Brown as the Ivy. Some Columbia, right? Some to Penn State. So like great schools that like these people went to and have achieved great things from that.
Princeton.
And yeah, there's like a little begrudgment, I think, that I have, that like I went to the University of Utah and like I'm still a little angry about that. You know, it's like I had full potential to go to a great school. Not that you need to go to a great school, but if anyone could have, it could have been me. I could have done it, and I didn't. And I think a lot of things that got in the way was like the church, the confidence, the fact that I didn't think that I needed to, that I was just trying to get married. I didn't want to leave Utah because I'd be harder to find someone to get married in the temple with. And these things got in the way of me pursuing a great education.
Yeah.
And by the way, I love University of Utah and Utah State. And I even have a soft place in my heart for BYU, and our son's at UVU. So I think Utah has great schools. I'm more talking about kind of the comparison game of that culture your parents chose to leave.
Right.
And if that might have been weighing on either of you a little bit.
Well, and real quick, can I give a shout out to Weber State? Because that's where I ended up
Weber State's
graduating.
great.
I had
Damian
such...
Lillard came from Weber State.
Yes, who's now in Oregon. He's a Portland Blazer. So I actually don't even have to. I live in Oregon now, is what I should say. But I don't even have to like say, you know, oh, I'm from Salt Lake City. I'll say I'm from Ogden. You know Damian, and they'll be like, oh. So yeah, it's so good. But I mean, I started up at Utah State, because like Weber State was like this commuter, like kind of like, you know, I don't know, like everyone. I mean, I'm pretty sure that they have an acceptance rate of 100%, which should be celebrated, you know. But I truly went to Utah State, hated the small culture, the small mindset culture there, transitioned to Weber State, and I just don't think that school gets nearly enough credit because I had an incredible experience.
Yeah. No, they're great schools.
And I bleed Wildcats. So I love that I graduated from Weber State, and I say that proudly. Where I thought JoCee was, you know, the high achieving son of a, because she went to the University of Utah. Like, so funny how perspective changes everything, because I was so impressed with what JoCee was doing at the University of Utah, you know.
And it may have unintentionally come off like you weren't happy at the U.
Right.
But I think that's not true. So go ahead.
Well, I have complex feelings about the U, because like if I were to do it again, I would have applied for Columbia, because why not? You know, like might as well shoot your shot. And I didn't even think to apply to these schools. I applied to the University of Utah, got in, that's where I went. But the U was great to me. It really was like, and it's a great school. So I had a lovely, lovely experience there that I treasure so fondly. But yeah, if I were to do it over, I should have shot a few more shots. I should have known to have done that. Yeah. And I didn't.
Yeah.
I think that's so key when it comes to like this reckoning we do with our conditioned selves, like to go back in time and to look at the choices. Like oftentimes we actually mourn the choices we didn't give ourselves. You know what I mean? The default that we just sort of placed ourselves in without a question, without any type of, and that's what I'm really hearing from you, particularly too, because you have a brother who also went, and I think that's an important part here.
It is.
Is like, maybe there were more options, more choices, more considerations, and maybe even like more comfort that he get to spend more money, as opposed to like, well, I know my role and I know where I'm going to end up. And so do you want to talk about any of that?
Yeah. And this is like where it gets like iffy, because I don't want my brother to feel poorly, but I also think that like I have a little bit of a grudgement for him because of these things, because he was given the options that I don't think I was. He applied to these colleges. He had help applying to these colleges. The bishop wrote his letter of recommendation to get into West Point, where my bishop told me I was a terrible person, right? Like a very different experience that we had. And we were so close in age and so competitive and both very interested in science, right? And so, he went to West Point. He got the help, and I ended up as an engineer. So clearly I figured it out, but like he was given a few more, advantages that I didn't. I had to kind of claw my way up there, and some of it he was kind of spoon fed. And honestly, I think it's because he was male. I think it's because he had the priesthood. His role was supposed to be a breadwinner. He had to make a lot of money, and I think people were more willing to mentor other young men in the ward, and they weren't willing to mentor young women in the ward, and that's kind of why. So I think it has a lot to do with unconscious bias in a lot of ways, and that's why our experiences are a little bit different.
Yeah.
Well, can I speak for my parents here for a second?
Yeah.
Because first off, I want to make it clear that most people who go to West Point and who go to these like really prestigious military academies are military family. Their families all go do that. There's not a single military person in our entire family. So that was nobody told our youngest brother that he should think about West Point. He chose that entirely of his own volition. This is where I struggle with our parents sometimes is I think that they allowed kind of like self-interest, like following your own interests to a detriment a little bit, because it's like, I just don't think that they'll say that Jackson chose West Point. So once he made that decision and made that his goal, they were going to do everything that they could to support that goal, as they should, right? But sometimes you don't know what goals you should be looking at. Like I thought about that with finance. It's like my dad was in finance, and I was like, Dad, why didn't you teach me to invest in stocks at a very early age? That's totally something that would have been in your wheelhouse. And he's like, well, you never asked. You weren't interested. And it's like, you're right. When I was 13 and 15, I wasn't thinking about the stock market. Silly me.
Being taught to quilt in activity days or young women, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you weren't given the vision of what you might be interested or could have been.
And I think that was, if there's the sin of my parents here, it's a failure of imagination of what JoCee could have been to the same extent. Because I want, my brother's own merit, he chose West Point. Nobody decided that for him. So good and great for him. But there could have been more. I mean, I didn't have it's funny when JoCee talks about that. No one even asked if I was going to college, because it was a struggle to get me to graduate, not because I wasn't smart, right? Well, I think that JoCee, it made sense for her to go to the University of Utah, which had a great science program, which she was already working in because she had done internships at the University of Utah. It was just, I think, if I'll speak for my parents, and I'll take that upon myself, a failure to pause and be like, we could think bigger. You could go bigger. It's not just that Jackson was special or exemplary to shoot for the stars.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
And in your parents' defense, that this is a very Mormon story. So it's and it's probably a very American story too. Go ahead.
Right. Well, and I kind of brought a point to emphasize that the bishop wrote my brother a letter of recommendation, and the bishop didn't help me, because once I showed interest in science and technology, my parents were like, yeah, let's go, let's get you there. And when I showed interest in finance, my dad was flying me around the country, right? I think it was the culture that told me I couldn't be those things. And I don't think that they were loud enough to be don't listen to where they were so quick to separate doctrine and culture. They didn't do that that for gender roles for me. And so they're like, nope, doctrine and culture, the family, the proclamation to the world, you belong at home, right? And so like they were easy to separate the two, but they couldn't for that. And I think that was really hurtful for me.
I have a question just about, and this might be uncomfortable. If it is, it's okay. You can just kind of say, but do you think that your parents underestimated the power of culture in your experiences once you got to Utah, or do you think they didn't see it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like, and I think both, right? And I think that they both kind of explain a lot of it, right? Because I don't think that they definitely never actively told me to be a mother, right? And that was the only important role for me. But like they didn't tell me otherwise, and so therefore I internalized messaging. And so I think they underestimated it and overestimated my ability to see past the bullshit that was so obvious to them, but didn't end up being obvious to me because I internalized it.
Yeah, we did that. We thought, okay, we're progressive, we're liberal, we're pro-LGBT, we're feminist, we're not racist, so we can raise our kids Mormon. Oh, and by the way, we don't body shame, and we're not about modesty culture, and we don't care if you show your shoulders. So we'll raise our kids Mormon, but we'll be able to neutralize all the damaging cultural messages.
Right.
But that's not how it works. You put your kids in that pool of conservative, toxic Mormon culture, they're going to be tainted and affected by it, even if you're constantly trying to neutralize the impact of that culture, I think.
Right. No, I think that absolutely makes sense. And I think it was a sin of omission, if anything, not like any active wording. It was just, I don't think they thought that I would internalize that culture as strongly as I really did.
Yeah. All right. So how was the University of Utah? And how did your faith progress at the U?
I loved the U. So I do want to give a quick shout out for just like some great things about the University of Utah. I was able to like work in the nuclear reactor, which I loved. And I had like a great internship.
Yeah, people don't know that there's a nuclear reactor underneath the University of Utah. And my sister freaking worked there, which is incredible.
So there's 7 universities that have a nuclear reactor on campus, and the University of Utah is one of them. And so I got the amazing opportunity to do research there and to even become a nuclear reactor operator for a little while through some classes, because you can take classes to learn to operate the nuclear reactor. So I was able to do that. I had like research, and the research was sponsored by NASA. Like I was all in at this point. I really, really loved it. And at the same time, I also started a 501c3 nonprofit organization, right? And I was loaning out prom dresses to girls in need. And this is kind of where
what was the nonprofit?
It was called Celebrate Every Day, and I would loan out prom dresses to girls in need all over the state. And we eventually partnered with Big Brothers Big Sisters. We partnered with the Tim Tebow Foundation. We partnered with the Miss Amazing Foundation, like and that's the special needs pageant.
A Night of Excellence, was it?
Night to Shine. That's Tim Tebow.
Oh, okay, sorry.
So I was able to do that, and that was a great experience. And I'll kind of bring in my Utah versus New York experience here. Like in New York, you really learn how to serve people around you. And one of the things that I think I internalized a lot was the act of service, and how like it needed to be more than just one evening and picking up supplies and gathering, a quick merit badge project to like bring supplies together and ship them off to troops, right? Like that's an easy service project, but service needs to be deep and meaningful and impactful and personal. And so I internalized that a lot and had like a great need to like serve. And so I started this nonprofit organization, which I loved. And my parents let me take over the entire basement, including Rylee's bedroom and 2 other bedrooms. And I was full of prom dresses. And I just had people come in and out of the house just renting prom dresses from me for free. And so I loved that.
So most kids either drop out of college or struggle to just survive. What's driving you to run nuclear reactors and start a 501c3 when most kids are just struggling to survive in college? What was going on there?
Right. So I stopped. And I think my years in college, I like really thrived and really did really well. So like I would say the high school was kind of the dark years. And then like I stopped talking to the bishop. I stopped attending any kind of church thing. I didn't stop believing. A lot of times people are like, I was physically in, mentally out. I was mentally in, physically out. I wasn't going, wasn't working for me, but I still really, really, truly believed. And I kind of was able to get rid of a lot of the baggage that I think I was carrying around and the shame that was kind of holding me back. and was able to really do really quite well in the university spectrum, away from my parents, away from this organization or the culture that I grew up in, right? I was in the University of Utah, where there's a strong anti-Mormon culture, right? And it's not like I hung out there, but it was around, and that kind of gave me some sort of breath of fresh air that I didn't have earlier.
So you did not attend student ward very much?
No, I mean, I went maybe like 7 times total.
In 4 years?
Yeah.
And what about Institute?
No way. Yeah, no
and
way.
were your parents like, why aren't you at Institute? Why aren't you, how's your ward? What's your calling? They weren't doing that?
No, and they weren't. They were kind of like with Rylee, like open and accepting. And I would have conversations with my dad about like the theology of the church at this point. And that was enough for them to be like, oh, yep, she still believes and she's still studying. And I was curious about different things within the church that was separate than the culture. And I think they were able to be like, this culture is bad, but like they still believe in the church, and that's great. And so that's kind of, I think, what they felt.
How much were you getting sort of like, Rylee really caused all this pain and suffering in the family. You can't leave the church, JoCee. Don't do that to us. Rylee's already disappointed us. You got to be the strong one and stay faithful. Did you ever get that kind of garbage?
Absolutely. But it would like come and go, right? And it was a lot more when I was younger, right? And that's when I was like, when I was 14, I felt like Nephi, right? Because I wasn't, sinning yet, and Rylee was, and I felt like I was doing great, and she was destroying the family, and I could see that. And that was definitely the narrative when I was 14. But like Rylee was kind of out and doing her own thing, and so it wasn't on anyone's mind to give me the lecture at that point that Rylee was destroying the life. I do know that when she got her records removed, I heard about that, and my dad like cried to me about that and told me how it was a big deal.
Were you in high school or college?
College.
Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, there wasn't much to talk about other than it was very impactful for him, and he was so sad over it, and he told me about it and was like, yeah, Rylee did this. And I think he knew at this time that like I wasn't attending church, but was holding on to the hope that I would come back, which I also was probably holding on to the hope that I would come back as well. And so therefore, how he perceived it was like, well, JoCee, when she figures it out, she'll be back, and there's nothing in her way to come back, where for Rylee, there's a big barrier to come back because now she has to get rebaptized. And so I think that's how it was at least spoken to towards me. But I mean, he was devastated when Rylee got her records removed, like just so sad, and talked about it. And every single time he would talk about it, he would tear up and took that so personally.
Was he saying, like one of the things I had to realize is if I talk to any of my kids about any of the other kids, they're going to know or think, well, he'll talk about me whenever I do something.
Yeah.
But, so like, what was that like to have your dad venting to you about your sister?
At this time, my dad and I were best friends, and I was also starting to go into finance at this time, so like even extra best friends. And I think my dance with finance was to really be accepted by my dad. And if I were being completely honest, that's probably what that was. And so my dad and we would commute 2 hours one way into Salt Lake and one way back, especially over summer when I wasn't staying at the dorms. I would, commute with him. And so like we were talking all the time, and we're best friends. And so I thought pretty special that he was confiding in me. I think it's now a little of inappropriate. But at the time I thought it was like really special, and like just like how much my dad trusted me and felt like he could tell me these things. And did I think he was talking about me behind my back? I did not. I thought that we were best friends. I thought that he was going to keep my secrets, and we were going to be great friends forever.
Yeah. And those are the types of things that cause sibling rivalry.
Perfect.
I mean, it's the story of Cain and Abel. It's the story of like East of Eden with Jonathan Steinbeck. Like when one kid starts to be favored or be a favorite, and you joked about this at the very beginning, when one kid starts to be or feel like they're the favorite, and then another kid sees that can cause kids to really go at each other. But it's the parents creating the sadness in the kids and the tension between the kids by kind of showing favoritism. But I'm not like dissing on your dad. Like I'm sure he knew that college and a mission turned him around, but then college was how he thrived. And he was probably vibing that you were thriving in college, and that made him feel really good and made him probably feel connected to you, right?
No, absolutely. And I don't know, did you feel like Dad was showing active favoritism during this time?
Well, yeah, because like when we'd be on the phone, he'd call me JoCee all the time.
Like
There was that.
Because you get the name wrong or what? Like,
we would
He
talk
would
so
be talking to
often.
me, and he'd just be like, "Well, JoCee, Rylee, who is this?
and you
Rylee."
took that to mean what?
Well, just that he was talking to JoCee all of the time, right? I knew that they were like spending so much time together, that JoCee was transitioning. I mean, in my mind, from my perspective, because and I want this on record, that I was always a proud big sister. Like, even though that there was competition felt and there was isolation felt, and JoCee rightfully and justifiably felt hurt by a lot of my actions that caused disruption in the family, I've always been so freaking proud of I had enough space and years between me, that JoCee and Jackson, there was a lot of competition between two siblings that were both redheads, that both looked like, but there was enough space for me that I just like marveled at both of them. So at the time, like, I just thought that JoCee was so great. It hurt that she thought so little of me, that she thought that I was such a fuck up, that I was such a waste of space, that she couldn't see, like, me as an individual. And that just hurt because I thought so highly of her. I thought she was so impressive and high achieving, both of my siblings. And so quite frankly, when she, started not doing the science stuff as much, which with the nuclear reactor and everything that I was so proud of, and saw that she was like going into finance, I was like, well, that's my dad. He's just such an influential person. Of course, JoCee's going to go into finance to find that recognition that she never feels like she finds with him or whatever. Like, I was more frustrated with my father than I ever was. And that's how my experience was, is I always was so proud of them, and more frustrated with my father for being an outsized influence. And can't you just see that she's just trying to get your acceptance all of the time? That's all this is. That's all this is. Yeah.
That's why I want you guys to watch Succession. Because you'll relate to so many of the dynamics in Succession.
I'm going to text you after and be like, all right, which character am I?
Back to Succession.
And I have to ask, JoCee, did he ever call you Rylee?
Yeah, I think so. He does now. He does now, for sure. Yeah, I know that he talks to her way more now.
Now he calls you Rylee. Okay.
No, I felt very special and very, cherished those conversations that I had with my dad. And I was switching into finance. So like, this is when I started like hanging out with the Ensign Peak people, among like amazing investors all over the world. I was like welcomed with open arms into this like finance world. I met with so
finance world.
Many people that it's kind of like shocking that I met. My dad flew me to New York, to Boston, to San Francisco, to LA, right? All like four corners of the country right there, to meet with these financial elites, because he was so excited that I wanted to go into finance, and he had influence and he had power and he had connections, and I was able to meet with these people. And that was really, really cool. That was really, really cool. And I acknowledge a lot of privilege that comes with, and I'm very grateful for those experiences. That was really cool.
Why did you pursue finance? What happened?
I did for a little while. So I did 2 internships on Wall Street, both with Deutsche Bank, if you guys know about Deutsche Bank. And I only got that internship because of my dad, right? And I can like say that pretty confidently. I was the only state school person. Everyone else was like, where did you go to school? Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, like they were all like these great schools. And I'm
Ivy
like,
Leaguers.
University of Utah, go Utes. So I didn't fit in. The only reason I got in was because I was able to have conversations with higher ups within Deutsche Bank, and they sponsored my internship, and that was because of connections with my dad. Like my GPA wasn't good.
How would an investor for Ensign Peak have relationships with influence with Deutsche Bank?
Right. Well, a lot of reasons. One, they're from Wall Street themselves, right? So like I did an internship on the same building my dad did an internship on 20 years previously, right? So like it's in New York.
It's a small world.
But also like the Ensign Peak influence is a big influence. And I remember that being a big deal actually when I got the Deutsche Bank internship, is that like they're like, well, Ensign Peak and your dad works for Ensign Peak and they're a big investor. And so therefore like we got to be like pretty cautious about how this internship works to not like have you be exposed to any of these investment vehicles that Ensign Peak is a part of. So you can only do internships in this subsection because you can't be near this because we don't want you to be privy to information you shouldn't be
conflict of
privy to.
interest.
Competitors.
Right. Conflict of interest in a lot of ways. So like my internship, and that it was a conversation that had to be had for all the internships that I got. And I got a lot of really great ones, and all because of my dad, right? Like this computer science major, what is she doing on Wall Street, right? Like,
Well, it just shows that JoCee excels in whatever role she takes on. She's an incredible achiever in whatever she sets her mind to. But it also speaks to answer your question, John, like even though Ensign Peak obviously was not transparent and not public knowledge to the overall public, and especially not to the members, in the investment world,
it was known.
People, I mean, money speaks, and there wasn't transparency or declaration on how much money there was. There was just all of a sudden like an awareness of, wow, Ensign Peak is everywhere, and they're at the table. I mean, so if you were in the investment world, you knew Ensign Peak before the members knew about Ensign Peak.
Right.
Yeah, we covered this in the Widow's Mite episodes, but like Ensign Peak, the investments at Ensign Peak are like, what are they, bigger than the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? They're like add up Harvard and Stanford and all the endowments combined. It's bigger than, there are only a few investment organizations with bigger assets than Ensign Peak. It's massive. It's
massive. And
Speaking of Bill and Melinda,
I have a great story about that. I'm going to save it for the next episode, though. That something about that. So bring this back up. But massive investments in
Wealth,
that's why
wealth.
I got the internships. Right. It's not like, and I do want to be like, I don't think I was like low achieving. They just like gave this internship to this like person who like clearly didn't deserve it, but like did not have the credentials that matched everyone else that was doing that internship. Did not match. But I was welcomed into those rooms because the relationship with my dad was more important than like this like 3-week long internship, right? Like might as well let her in, I think is probably how they saw it. And then we're like, oh, JoCee's pretty good. And then they offered me return offers. And those return offers I take on my merit because you're not going to get a return offer if you're bad. And I did get the return offers. But I was welcomed into the door because of Ensign Peak and because of my dad.
And because he was such an influential like we said, he's involved with a lot of people. He's put a lot of people in good situations. He has a lot of, not that he calls on favors, but a lot of people
that he could. And they all speak so greatly
highly
of him, right? And so like when I was doing these internships in New York, I was staying in the houses of these investors that he was doing these group like investments with, right? So like they're very personal relationships as well that I got to live in penthouses in New York City because of, and that was really cool, really great.
Yeah, I mean, not to be disparaging, but it's a ton of privilege, right?
Absolutely.
So much privilege.
Absolutely.
A gross amount.
Absolutely. It really is. And I didn't even acknowledge how much privilege it totally was. And I'm so grateful for the privilege that there was.
And in some ways, though, I do have to say, because I was so proud of everything that JoCee did, but it was not lost upon me that these privileges and experiences were afforded to her because JoCee was showcasing the right, and seeking it out and doing it. And
the Mormon, she appeared very Mormon and faithfully Mormon, right?
Yeah.
And I think that mattered. And I think the fact that I still believed was important, or the fact that like, even though like I wasn't a perfect Mormon, I was still actively trying. I hadn't given up on it. And I
showcasing
think,
what I called it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So why didn't you keep pursuing finance?
Right. Okay. So during finance is just like engineering where you're the only woman in the room. And I don't know, for some reason I thought that would get better. But as I progressed through college, I was the only woman in the room. And things got weird in a lot of weird ways that I couldn't articulate well at the time. And I can now articulate a lot better. But like I would be like asked out by every single one of my TAs because I was the only woman in the computer engineering classes, right? A lot of electrical engineering classes, only woman. And I was asked out. And that's weird, right? And because people would see this TA asking me out, they would now like complain that I was like doing well because I was getting help from the TA. And therefore like my merit was so undermined at the fact that I was female, right? Or a lot of like I'd get so many comments like that where I just didn't feel like I fit in the room more and more and more.
This is back at the U.
This is back at the U.
Computer science.
So I got a degree in computer science. The idea going into finance was that I'd be a quant, right? So I'd get my computer engineering degree, I'd take my coding skills, and I would build a AI algorithm that would trade for you. So I wanted to combine the two. So I would get the degree, but still go into finance. So I was still doing New York City internships, but pursuing a computer science degree. Which would be really cool. Someone write me that bot. I will subscribe. And so a lot of experiences happened like that. Or I'd be like, people would be like, oh, you got a scholarship. And I'd be like, yeah, I got the scholarship, and very proud. And they'd be like, you only got it because you're female. And
affirmative action,
which is, frustrating. And I felt like I wasn't considered an equal in a lot of places. So how did I leave finance? I left finance when I left the church, basically. And why did I leave the church? I just wanted to be clear, and maybe hear the sound out for you. I would not have left the church if I was a man. I don't think I would have. I didn't have a spiritual awakening, right? I didn't have a spiritual transition. I had a feminist awakening where I was like, wow, I am not being treated equal in these rooms. And even though I'm working so hard to be in these rooms, harder than a lot of people to be in these rooms, I am so discredited. What is going on? And I looked and I was like, learned the word patriarchy for the first time. And I was like, it's a system of patriarchy. What is happening? What is causing the system of patriarchy? Why do I myself feel inferior to people? Why do I go into a room and make myself small, right? Am I small? Do I need to be small? Why am I not accepted and allowed to speak? And so I kind of looked internally and looked externally and tried to figure out what was going on there. And I realized that I was a woman and the world is a different place for women. And why is that the case? And why was that the case in my world, my sheltered, protected world? Why was I treated differently as a woman? And I came down to Mormonism, an unapologetic patriarchal religion, put me in a box that I didn't like and I didn't want to be in. And I found that to be wrong. And that's why I left the church. And that would not have happened if I was male. I probably would have sat in the privilege, would have loved the priesthood, would have loved to have had more authority than every other woman in the entire world because I was a 12-year-old boy with a priesthood authority. I would have loved that, I'm sure. But because it was unfair to me, I was like, wow, this is a bad system. I finally saw it for the first time. And that's when I started leaving.
Okay, so kind of zoning in on your testimony and your relationship with the church now, you said that once you went to the U, you stopped attending church, and you didn't attend institute, but you described yourself as mentally in but physically out. Mm-hmm. So you start experiencing sexism and patriarchy in the finance world and at the university level in STEM. But make the connections for how you tied that into Mormonism and then decided it was going to impact both your faith and ultimately your relationship with the church. Maybe chronologically, can you take us to there's this moment where you start going down the rabbit hole. I know you just kind of gave us the overview conceptually, but can you kind of tell the story of you falling into the rabbit hole and then how you let other people know and then how that played out for you individually, but also for your family and your relationships. And ultimately, if you ever ended up telling Rylee, if so, when and how, right?
Right. So I think my first, I read an essay online and it was by Amy McPhee, that her viral essay, and I can't believe what it's called.
It's Dear Mormon Man.
Dear Mormon Man.
Right.
I read that, and the emphasis.
Well, Dear Mormon Man, what would you
do, or what would you say?
Yeah, I'm going to look it up. Keep going.
Yeah. And I read that, and that really hit me in a lot of ways. And the point of this essay was Dear Mormon Man, what would you do if all of your prophets were female? If all of the people in front of the room were female? What would you do if the only people that could give you a priesthood blessing were female? What would you do if the only authority in the room was female? What would you do if anything you said could be undermined by a female? What would you do? And that really hit me. And I was like, wow, and I didn't even think that patriarchy was bad. I kind of didn't think that Mormonism was bad at all. And I was living what I thought to be a really, I had a very big testimony despite not wanting to be an active participant in the singles ward.
And really quickly, I'm a little bit embarrassed that I'm rusty, but the essay is Dear Mormon Man, Tell Me What You Would Do. And Amy McPhialibest, who we had on Mormon Stories years ago, years before she started Breaking Down Patriarchy podcast, this essay had gone viral.
Right.
And so I had her on Mormon Stories. And she wrote it as a faithful, believing Mormon at the time. She was at Stanford. Her husband, Eric, was like running chess.com. And she was, but the essay is basically helping a man try and understand what it would be like to live in a world where women dominated everything. That was the intent of the essay. So you're saying somehow you heard about that essay while you were at the U. Okay.
And I looked around and I was like, I'm the only woman in every single room, every single day, every single class, every single internship. I'm the only woman in the room. What would they do if the position was switched, right? And like I had like that thought, and it's like, and why am I in this position every single day? Why am I the only woman? And is this fair? Is this doesn't make sense, because I feel like I'm important and I've been taught my entire life that I'm important, yet women aren't important. And this didn't sit well with me. And so when I started kind of unraveling Mormonism was where it's like, well, there's only men in leadership. What? You know, and being like, a 12-year-old boy has more authority than me. What? Like I cannot give my future family a priesthood blessing. What? You know, like even as faithful as I thought I was trying to be, and as like great of a person as I wanted to be, I would be barred from giving my future children a blessing when they were sick because I was female. That was the reasoning. And so I kind of started like learning about like, you know, Kate Kelly and like, why can't women get the priesthood, and asking these simple questions that aren't very crazy questions, like why are women blocked from this? And Black people were also blocked, right? Why were they blocked? You know, and racism kind of correlates with the country and the country I live in. Sexism kind of also does too. Wow, this makes a lot of sense, right? And understanding that, and that's how I started breaking that down, and that it just wasn't working for me, and so I had to move away from it even further in order to respect myself. And so I started looking within my life and seeing where the sexism took place, and seeing where I had truly internalized these sexist messages that were kind of unfair. And a lot of it was like, you need to be a mother, right? Engineering's cute, but you'll give it up soon when you get your MRS degree, because that's way more important than your computer engineering degree. And I started breaking down these barriers and questioning why I felt like I couldn't pursue these degrees full-heartedly. And I also had like a few unfair experiences as well, especially when I was pursuing finance. And when I was traveling across the world to pursue finance, these were Mormon investors that I was mostly talking to, and they would stop me and they would ask me, they're like, Wall Street's a really hard career to get into. And I'd be like, I know, and that's why I want to do it, you know, like it's going to be great. And they're going to be like, well, how are you going to have a family and be on Wall Street? And like these questions were asked many times, and my dad warned me that they would be asked, right? And so I'm kind of, you know, did they ask men those questions? You know, like why can't I be on Wall Street and also have kids and also make money, and also like why am I shoved into this tiny hole of a person when I want to accomplish so much more? And so that's what I started breaking down, and then looking into my past and looking, and it's like, wow, the church has a certain template for women, and that template doesn't work for me, and it's a very sexist template. And by divine design, the Lord said himself that woman's place is in the home and man is outside the home. And I can't fight with God, so I just need to turn away from this God entirely, because that's not the God that I can believe in. Because I know I'm a capable, confident, want to do interesting things woman, right? And I need to be able to be that, and I can't within the constraints of Mormonism.
Yeah, that's powerful.
And let me just ask, that all makes perfect sense to me. The fact that in 2023, there's not daily, hourly outrage that that still only men can hold the priesthood within Mormonism. Like in 2023, it just seems ridiculous. So all that makes sense to me. However, whether it's, Christine Hagland or Jana Reese or Rosalind Welch or, there's Nyla McBain, there's a ton of progressive feminist believing Mormon women that are like, oh yeah, down with the patriarchy, go women, feminist, great. But the church is true. Joseph Smith was a prophet in the Book of Mormon, and I've had my spiritual experiences where I can never deny the faithfulness of the church. Like, you can have a feminist awakening, but still retain all your orthodox, literalistic Mormon beliefs. But that's not what happened to you. Do you have any insight as to why you weren't able to just become a believing Mormon feminist woman?
Right, and that's a good question and a good point, because I think that like amount of cognitive dissonance is what a lot of great people have, and that's good or bad. But I kind of like, people go down the rabbit hole of like discovering the history of Mormonism. I went down the rabbit hole of discovering the history of feminism. And this is like, Amy's a big hero of mine, and shout out to her because she started this Breaking Down Patriarchy podcast. And I just binge listened to that podcast like all the time, and just like learned about the progression of feminist thought and like the constructs that were built to keep women in their place over time and how they still exist now. But why didn't that work with me within Mormonism itself? Well, while I was diving into the history of the country, I can't help but also stumble on the history of certain aspects of Mormonism that I find interesting. And I wasn't looking for anything bad. I wasn't going out of my way to find anything negative. But it's like,
you have to justify, right?
Anti-Mormon literature.
And I'm still justifying it now. That wasn't the goal, right? But like, as I'm like learning about the history of women throughout the country, I'm also like learning about the history of like Mormonism, right? Because Utah has a very feminist rich history. If people don't know that, right? Women in Utah were the first group to get the right to vote because they wanted them to vote against polygamy, right? So when you start learning about the history of feminism in this very deep way, you get introduced in the history of Mormonism because of that strong connection of polygamy and Utah women voting and the fact that they were such advocates for women to vote and then like took it away from the women. It's a very fascinating story.
Well, I think that's a power thing. I've got to say something about that because that's always been something that's irritated me about Mormonism is that we claim, oh, we're this really progressive feminist culture. We gave women the opportunity to vote. And the way that I read history in the books that I've read, I've entirely reject that because I think it was a way for men who were telling all of their wives what to vote for, that they were overrepresented in the House of Representatives and in Congress because they had more votes. They were telling their women how to vote, you know? It's that interesting dichotomy of that gilded cage where we're going to let you participate in the political sphere as long as it perpetuate our agenda, right?
Yeah.
It wasn't a feminist play, it was a voting play.
Exactly.
It was a power play.
Yeah.
Right. Basically,
when you have 5 women to every woman, 5 women to every man, you want those votes. Yeah.
But so when you study feminist history, you quickly get into polygamy, right?
That's
and
what I was
once
going to
you
say.
start
Is it
the rabbit hole of polygamy, you get into Mormon history. And then once I read Mormon history, I was like, okay, this is obviously not good, not correct.
So what, if you don't mind slowing down on that part, what did you study in Mormon history that was disturbing to you or troubling?
Right. So it started with polygamy, right? Because that's why women got the first right to vote.
Well, I have a question real quick first, because did you know about polygamy before this?
I did, and I kind of justified it. In fact, my mom was the first person to correct me because I was like, oh, polygamy, they were just doing that so that like men could protect the women. And my mom was like, that's not correct. And this was like, I was pretty young, 14, right?
Our mom always had an issue with polygamy.
As she should.
And was not, exactly, and was unabashedly,
So I knew about it, but then like justified that away. But
your mom said that narrative you've been told that there were just too many women and too few men, and so the men had to take on extra wives, which is what we were all taught growing up.
Right.
Your mom told you that wasn't true.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. She's the one that told me that wasn't true because I was like defending it, and she's like, "That's not true," which is good for her. But yeah, so I learned about the history of polygamy, and I was like, "Well, what was like Mormons' kind of view on polygamy? Why was this such a big deal?" And then like you quickly go into Joseph Smith's polygamy story and like the start of polygamy and the fact that he's like marrying these 14-year-old girls, and like that's problematic, and like these sister wives, and that's problematic, and these mother-daughter duos, and that's problematic. And it became gross to me pretty quickly. And then once you start down that rabbit hole, you go down like all the rabbit holes, right? Where you're like Mountain Meadow Massacre, right? And that's problematic, and the blacks in the priesthood and owning slaves, and that's problematic. And so many things are problematic. That,
did you get into Book of Mormon, like as a person who cares about science? Did you get into historicity of the Book of Mormon, DNA, anachronisms, and did you get into Book of Abraham and Egyptology and that kind of stuff?
I never kind of got as much into like the Abraham stuff, but yeah, the fact that like there's the DNA evidence and that the Mormon church was so against evolution for a long time that the narrative was like Joseph Smith and Darwin were born the same year. One was righteous, one wasn't, right? Like, and like, it's like, no, I believe in evolution, and that wasn't a doubt in my mind, you know? And
we should make t-shirts, Darwin is my prophet.
Right. It's crazy.
Teasing.
And so yeah, I started like reading about like, you know, and it's not like DNA's new. We knew that where the train of people came from
Very
before
straight.
DNA, you know, like there was other evidence that was just kind of the final nail in the coffin. So yeah, I started like looking into all of that, and then like the anachronisms that like evolution doesn't work the way it's supposed to, and you're missing a lot of things, and once you start it, you just can't stop in a lot of ways.
Well, and that was speaking to kind of the inaccuracies of the Book of Mormon. And this, if I can, and this is a judgment statement, tell me if this is inaccurate, because this is kind of how I understand it, is because the church, in my experience, was truly so doctrinally informed that like the inaccuracies of the Book of Mormon and the anachronisms where like there weren't horses and stuff like that was much more faith foundational shaking in my experience. And then I like, you know, was like Kinderhook plates and, you know, the translation of Nephi, or the translation of Joseph Smith, and in Second Nephi, he condemns polygamy outright and then starts practicing it on the side. Like all of those things were like meaningful mind benders to me, where a lot of JoCee's experience was, again, kind of this cultural fusion, right? Because that's where she was, is like where Utah, all she talked about was temple marriage and families and eternal family, like all of these really kind of like how to socially show up and fit within the cultural confines of Mormonism, that I think the feminist aspect resonated so much more with her experience, where like, I felt like when I first started talking with her and I was like, well, did you know about this? And did you know about this? That's not really was the sticking point for her as much, because her testimony was built on temple marriages and the proclamation of the family and these like gender roles things. So once like the breaking of the gender roles and the understanding that these patriarchal confines keep you in a box, that was way more meaningful to her than like the foundational Mormon stuff. That was what broke my brain.
Right.
Does that feel right?
It does. I mean, I'm like very curious into like the science behind it, but like once I was like, women aren't not in charge and they'll never be in charge, therefore bad organization, right? Like that's the only algorithm that I needed to make at the time. And now I look back at it, I'm like, yeah, it's very interesting, and let's talk about the fact that there's a lot of other reasons why this is not correct.
Yeah. How a flood couldn't have happened.
Right. Where did the water go? I don't know. Yeah.
Well, that's a very important pathway to disaffection, where you experience cultural or social injustice. For some, it's feminism. For some, it's LGBTQ stuff. For some, it's both. And it's almost the cultural and social justice. It's the cultural and the social justice experiences that then precede the intellectual awakening.
Right.
You know?
Well, and you're so right. And that's an awareness that I had to come to, because that was almost a point of pride for me, where I was like, I can tell you doctrinally why this is conflicting and doesn't work. And I kind of discredited JoCee and also some of like my younger compatriots, where like they just left because of social reasons. And I was like, yes, the social reasons are disgusting, and let that be the beginning of your exit strategy. But does it matter to you that the doctrine is also conflicting? And And like, no, it's just that they don't treat people equally. And that's enough. That needs to be enough. Like, I had to learn that, Rylee, nobody cares that much. Like, only certain people are going to be that thoroughly interested in the doctrinal inaccuracies and the hypocrisy. But for other people, just that they can exist as they can't identify as queer safely within this community. They can't show up as a woman and as a full-bodied human and be both, you know, an achiever and a mother, that they can't fit into these social norms. And if that makes you unsafe, that's enough to leave. You don't have to justify it by like the theological debate that I felt like I had to have for years.
Yes.
You know, and
Such
now
a
I
great
see that
point.
with like kids today, where it's like they don't like how, you know, things are working socially for them, and that's more than enough. Yeah.
That's right.
But what's kind of super weird and distressing to me is your shame parade experience as a teen should have been enough for you to say, this is awful. I'm being treated horribly for doing normal developmental things, and I'm super depressed, so this all must be messed up. But as a teenager, you're taught that there's no acceptable way to leave. It's got to be you that's the problem. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, social justice, yeah, historicity and science, but forget and ignore your own lived experience that was leading to depression and endless shame and misery for you.
It's like a good observation that I hadn't like put together. Like, yeah, that wasn't the breaker for me. It was the fact that I didn't have a full functioning future that was the breaker for me. And now looking back, I can see that. And like, why did I stay even though it was like so hard? It's a good question.
Well, you were a kid.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's also this idea of church over family. And we talked about it at the end of your episode as well, Rylee. But like another scenario very well could have been, well, I love my sister Rylee, and we've been through a lot together. And she's smart and she's spunky, and she's found out some problems. I wonder why it's not working for her. Let me go to her and learn about what's going on. Rylee, tell me all the reasons this isn't working for you. Oh my gosh, I love you. I love you more than my church. If this isn't working for you and if they're treating you this bad, then it's not going to work for me. Again, a thought that probably never entered your mind of family over church, right?
Never. And like,
Never.
and like I say, like I became the exact person that I like didn't want to be or despise now. Cause like for Rylee, it was just like, well, I don't really care what you believe in now because whatever it is, it's wrong. You know, like you got it.
Even though I was very much right, I wanted on record that I was very much right. We had a fun coming together. But yeah, did you ever see me as a credible source? I
Never.
Finish that thought.
No, like Rylee was never a credible source. And even though like, and I don't know, did we like each other back in high school? I don't think we did.
For a little bit.
Maybe, yeah. But like, it was just so much like anger and frustration that wasn't allowed she wasn't allowed to be a credible source, and her story wasn't important or like wasn't worth listening to. And a lot of ways that I now am on the experience, like receiving side of, right? Like, cause it's not like anyone asked me what I believe, you know, like they're just like, oh, you don't believe in Mormonism? We'll be here when you come back, you know, kind of situation, which is what I was to Rylee. And so I have a lot of empathy for Rylee, and then maybe a little bit of understanding for the people that aren't curious and don't think to ask because they're so entrenched into this culture and this cult to not know to ask these questions or to not know how to appropriately love people.
Yeah. One thing I do think that's worth mentioning is just how vulnerable children are to systems, you know? And so we could say that with the church system. I think it's also true of family systems. And so I have all the compassion for how it's not like as a child you get to like look around your family or, you know, look at like how the church and you're like, you know what, I think I'm going to head down to the Smiths. I'm out. I'm going to go and I'm going to pick that family because I like you don't have the resources to do that. You're kind of trapped. And so really what it's about is survival. And I kind of say it a lot on Mormon stories, but we should not judge how we survive. When we come to and when we're aware and when we kind of reflect and look back, hey, it's a beautiful thing to say, hey, some of those things, they no longer honor me, and so I'm going to choose different things. But like you both tried to survive in environments, you know, that at some point you were really suffering in, you know, and we can just say, well done. Like, you're here. It worked, you know? And now we work on the healing and we work on you kind of, but like all the love and all the, you know, honoring of you getting through some really hard things. And also in that vein, like you had every reason to kind of look at what happened to your older sister and all the mayhem and and to say, I think I'm going to choose another way. To where, you know, that makes all the sense in the world to say, wow, I experienced, you know, and witnessed all of that. Maybe I'm not going to do that. So I'll try.
Meaning not leave the church?
Meaning, yeah, and be not overt about it and be, you know, less like, in a way, integrated. You had more of a public self and then like a private self. And that public self was designed to keep you safe and to keep you included, to get you on finance trips and to give you some of the opportunities.
And to get daddy's approval.
Yeah, that you recognized, like, you know, there was a loss in family support, a real cutoff. And so that is that makes all the sense in the world. And we shouldn't have judgment about that. It's sort of like, I'm just saying it makes absolute sense how you navigated your situation in your teen years and saying, okay, so I'm gonna actually work a middle ground here.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that there was like some pain there. But I like to kind of bring up the survival aspect.
That's a great point.
Right? Because we don't choose that.
No.
It's not a conscious choice. Like, oh, let me see. And it's literally we react in ways to survive and we're just grasping at things.
It's,
you know?
So insightful.
It's systems. But also, one framing is that Rylee paved the way for you to be able to leave the church. But another framing is that it was extra courageous for you to be willing to consider leaving the church after seeing how your parents treated Rylee and after seeing how much pain Rylee, and these aren't the right words, but also from your parents' point of view, how much pain Rylee caused your parents and your family. You could look at it either way, that Rylee made it easier for you, or that it was extra courageous for you to be willing to even consider taking that step, knowing how much pain Rylee caused your family.
Such a good point.
I feel like Rylee showed me what would happen, right, in a lot of ways. And so like I was extra careful, right? So like so I'm married and I feel like I talked about like my high school boyfriend, so I want to like talk about how much I love my husband as well. When we did move in together, we kept it a secret because I saw what happened when Rylee moved in with her boyfriend and it was bad, right? So we didn't tell anyone, and like it made sense. We needed to do it. You know, we both couldn't afford our individual places and we were already engaged, right? And so we moved in and we didn't tell anyone, right? And it was eventually found out and it was more accepted than when it happened with Rylee. I feel like the shock, she shocked my parents. So when I did it, it was less shocking and therefore their reactions were better. But yeah, I absolutely hid that from my parents and from my family because I did not want to go through what she did. I could not be cut off from health insurance, right? I could not be cut off from car insurance at that time. And that's what happened to her. And
you were cut off from health insurance and car insurance?
Yeah. And the health insurance was contingent on the church's employment, right? So that does not cover contraception and birth control or any of that. So, I was living with, my high school boyfriend, which my college boyfriend. You feel like such a child. Living with my college boyfriend, obviously starting to become, sexually active and went to go get a contraception. That was not covered. That was a big bill. It was an event in our family where I could no longer access those health benefits because that's not something that was covered by Deseret Mutual, which is a Mormon health insurance company. And then obviously I costed them a lot of money on car insurance because I had accidents and wrecks and I was like a reckless teenage driver and cost my parents a lot of money to the point where they had some right, I'm sure, they paid for a lot of things before they said no more. And also, if you're going to live with your boyfriend and act like an adult, then be an adult. Then grow up and be an adult. Yeah.
I got too, right? And was fearful of, and I eventually got, was like, if you're going to act like an adult, you're going to be an adult and like pay for these things. But yeah, absolutely hit it because of these things that she went through.
I think that's so important because you do see that as well, where, you can be honest about it and you get punished. Or you have this other way, which is like that, yep, I'll show you, and then I'll drive the rest underground. And it goes underground. And there's a cost scenario, I think, for the person that way, because you basically, you're living a split life, right, as opposed to an integrated life. But yeah, it doesn't really prevent.
But it should always be a red flag to people when religions cause family members to lie to their family members, because people might not always tell the truth, but religion should never create an environment where family members have to hide and lie to other family members. There's just no excuse for religion to do that, I think.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, so you move in with your boyfriend.
Yeah, and we've been married for 5 years now, and that's lovely.
That did bother me a little bit when I learned that, mom and dad were totally supportive of JoCee living with her soon-to-be husband. But I think that, and they found out.
They responded a lot better.
And they responded really well. They've learned a lot, And I think that they were so much more supportive of her relationship because her husband is a truly incredible human being.
They love him. And so I think that also helps that he also, we both can play the part, I suppose, and get the affection that's necessary.
Well, and they saw that I didn't want anything to do with the family, and I know that they carried a lot of guilt with that, and that so they weren't going to lose JoCee. They were going to start maintaining the relationship at all costs, and some of these things, maybe they don't matter as much as the relationship matters.
So there's a lot of maturity difference, and we both went through the exact same experiences, and 4 years apart, we had different experiences growing up, and my parents changed in
and
those
different
4
parents.
years.
Yeah.
But first kids often take the hit for the subsequent kids.
Do not envy you.
Yeah.
But she paved the way, right? I think if I was the first one to move in with my boyfriend or fiance at the time, it would have been tough, right? Like you paved the way in a lot of ways I didn't have to. So
That was a thank you, I think.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So who was the first family member you told that you didn't believe anymore?
Ooh,
And
that's a
how
good
did that
question.
conversation go?
That's a really good question. Yeah, and that's a really good, and I kind of want to put the record straight a little bit because I feel like I started like leaving the church when I got married, right? And I didn't have a Mormon wedding, but I also didn't
Did you have to
like,
explain that to your parents why you weren't getting married in the temple? Like that was the whole point, right?
right. And yes and no, right? Because they knew that my husband wasn't Mormon and
He wasn't Mormon.
Well, he had openly turned away from the church at the age of like 19, right? So
He didn't go on a mission.
He didn't go on a
that
mission.
was a big deal in his family.
He wasn't active. He never planned on being active. He was outward. I don't want anything to do
He
with
was
the church.
Rylee, basically.
He was
right.
Rylee.
And he was the
Rylee.
oldest as well.
He was the oldest.
I think that's why Jaden and I get along so swimmingly, as he's also the oldest. And yeah.
We have similar
You did, you married
JoCee
me.
Rylee.
For sure. You and
I always knew
Jaden,
she loved me.
twins.
Sorry.
No, he. It's not like he was like. He was pretty anti, like he was not into the church at all, and he has his own story to tell, but he was so respectful of me and my situation, right? So at this time I wasn't drinking coffee, I wasn't attending, and I was starting to like go into like my feminist kind of like rabbit holes a little bit, but like wasn't like being like, I think the church is wrong. I was still in a place where it's like, okay, I had made mistakes previously where I had dated people that were Mormon and that didn't work out, and I had made great experiences where I dated great people and that did work out. And so I found a great person, and he wasn't Mormon, but I was like, he's the person I'm going to pick and I'm going to make it work. And I actually was under the impression that I would like be the single person that went to the church, because I kind of see my dad do that, right? It's not like my mom is very active in the church. My dad goes by himself, and he's very respected in the community, and that works out for them, and that's fine, and you can still have kids with morals, and I kind of saw that. So that's what I thought we would be. And so I talked to Jaden, and he'll share this story too, but I was like, I think I'm going to raise our future kids in the church, if that's okay with you, and do you have any qualms with that? And he's like, no, I just don't want to be involved in it. If you think it's the moral right thing to do that. I'm going to let you go through this transition and raise kids how you think is best, and we'll approach it when that time comes. So that's 100% what I thought would happen. So I knew I was not going to get married in the temple, but I was okay with that because I believed in an all-loving God that would make that okay in the end, right? That's the God that I believed in and thought about and knew about. And so he was a great guy, and that's what mattered to me at the time.
So there was no discussion with your parents, like, you're falling away, you're not marrying the temple, you're disappointing us, you're not marrying a return missionary priesthood holder. You never had that conversation?
Not like that. No, certainly not. But they certainly asked whether or not he was active and what my plans were to have kids in the covenant. And they're like, well, you're not going to have kids in the covenant. It's like, I know that, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to have kids that aren't Mormon or aren't going to get baptized and don't believe. So I had that conversation with my dad, where it's like, I still plan on it. And if Jaden comes back, great. If he doesn't, great. I'm going to respect him. He's the person. But I'm going to have Mormon kids. But we had that conversation, just not like I'm disappointed in you. Like you meet Jaden and you love him because he's a great guy. So I don't think they could, in good conscience, have that kind of conversation.
I just want to note that for many Orthodox Mormon parents, that's the worst disaster that could ever happen, is your kid not marrying in the temple.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. That's why I wanted to define Orthodox from the beginning, because Orthodox believing, nuanced living, right? Because my parents didn't get married in the temple. They got sealed in the temple later, and I was born underneath the covenant. But they had a much more nuanced view of the world. Their worldview was wider, and kind of more all-encompassing. Yeah. And I feel like they felt there wasn't just one template for everyone, because they had lived different templates and still continue to live different templates that aren't a one-size-fit-all everything. There is one thing, though, that I want to say that always kind of bothered me about being someone who's left the church, because it always felt a little bit condescending. But the way that I heard our parents talk about Jaden and the way I heard our parents talk about me was but they could come back. Right. There's no respect for that you've left, and that's the end of the conversation. To them, it's this difficult phase that you're coming through, but you'll come to your senses. And that always felt incredibly dismissive.
I think that's a real lived experience for sure. Yeah. And something that was often said to Jaden, and I might have even made the mistake in saying it as well. And I do apologize if that's the case, because I'm sure I had some sort of inkling of a belief, if I'm being completely honest with me, that with myself, that it would be okay, because God would figure it out in the end, and maybe Jaden would change his mind, or maybe not. But yeah, Jaden was completely respectful of allowing me to explore this, which is really incredible.
So you got married outside the temple. It was an Ensign Peak wedding, right?
Yeah. So I allowed my dad to invite his friends to the wedding, and that ended up being a lot of Ensign Peak people. A lot. And then a lot of investors I had met over the years who were investors with Ensign Peak. So they flew in from New York and Pennsylvania and California to attend my wedding, which was great because I was poor and they wrote big checks for me. So I appreciated that. But also weird because now my wedding kind of turned into a business meeting a little bit. For myself as well as for my dad. And so I have mixed feelings on it.
They were talking about investments?
Or I think my dad hung out with his friends more than he hung out with his family. My family was also there. And I don't think he really spoke to my grandma and grandpa,
he spoke to grandma and grandpa. Yeah, but there was a lot of time.
His attention was directed primarily.
Right.
Yeah. Ensign Peak Exec officiated the wedding.
Yes, and so we needed someone to officiate our wedding. And so, my dad asked if I wanted this bishop to officiate who worked at Ensign Peak. And I said yes, and respectful of my husband, we were we don't want it to be Mormon affiliated at all. Please remove any Mormon references. Are you comfortable doing that? So an Ensign Peak employee officiated my wedding even. And
David and Carr Carly would have been there.
They were there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were there. Dave and Carly were there. A lot of them, the CIO of Ensign Peak was there.
Yeah.
A lot of people from Ensign Peak were there, which is very kind. It was an act of support. And that's what that was for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, an Ensign Peak wedding.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, so like that kind of, I guess Rylee would have prepared your parents for the eventuality of you leaving in some ways, and then you marrying a non-Mormon and not getting married in the temple. It was just like that the chips were, the cracks were happening, the chips were happening. Maybe, that lessened the ultimate blow when it came, if it ever came.
To like tell them?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point. Like, when did it come? And
Well, when did Jaden get his records removed?
I don't know. Well, he stopped believing when he was
he didn't. Okay.
19.
Okay.
Following to get the records removed, no.
Okay.
Just like turned away from it kind of situation.
So was there ever a conversation with your dad or mom that I don't believe anymore and I won't be coming back to church?
Yep, there certainly was.
How long ago was that?
And it wasn't like just like a, hey, I no longer believe. It was more like, and I feel bad because this is not the way to approach these things, especially when you have like a loving parent. I was like, Dad, you work for the church. Explain these list of complaints I have. And I like read off everything that didn't make sense to me. And I was like, justify this. Just
give us a sense.
Why did Joseph Smith marry a 14-year-old? And why was that 14-year-old living with him? That was a big one, right? That was a huge one in my mind. Why don't women have the priesthood? Why don't I deserve the priesthood? Please explain to me why I will never be worthy enough for the priesthood. That was probably where I got the most hung up on is women in the priesthood, and explain to me why I will never be worthy. Why do I not deserve to give my child a father's blessing or a mother's blessing at that point? Why don't we go, pray to a mother goddess? If we talk about God, the creator, I don't know what man that's created something, but I know a lot of women that have created something. So why aren't we talking about women more in this context, right? Why is she protected? That's benevolent sexism. Do you know what benevolent sexism is? Because I feel like there's a lot of it in my childhood. Those were the tough conversations that I had one day, and I think he got the message that I no longer believed. And
did he try and give you the apologetic responses? I mean, Rylee talked a little bit about about your dad's attempts to resolve her concerns. Did he try the apologetic stuff with you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And he would like talk me through it, and I'd be like, and then I'd get frustrated because I'd get confused, and I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. But wait a second. And then I'd step away from it and I'd be like, wait a second, I found the hole. That doesn't make sense anymore. And then I'd have to go back to him and I'd be like, well, now there's a hole in this argument. Now justify that. And he would justify that. And I'd step away and I'd be like, wait a second, that doesn't make sense anymore. And so I kind of followed these things over and over and over again. And that's kind of, and then we started like kind of fighting, which is kind of sad because like my dad went from being like my best friend, right, who I talked to all the time, commuted to with hours. He would call Rylee my name because he was talking to me on the phone so much. I wanted to go into finance for him. And I was like, to being like, you represent an organization, or you uphold an organization, or you financially enable an organization that I fundamentally believe is wrong and corrupt, right? The corporation of the Church of Jesus Christ does not have any women on their board of directors. Therefore, it is a bad organization, right? And you support this, but I'm a woman, and why aren't you picking me? And so like there was like a huge kind of shredding at that point where I lost that father.
You said those things to him?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever experienced on like these faith crisis retreats we've done in the past is when the Nephis who are used to being the favorites, who are used to being viewed by their parents and all the love and the attention for being Nephi, when they fall from grace in their parents' eyes, they sob, because it's one thing to be layman. It's another thing to be Nephi and then fall in status. And that's very, very difficult. What was it like for you?
Right. No, it was really difficult, but it was really, really difficult. And like to like lose who I considered my best friend too, right? Because like in my mind, he chose this organization that doesn't like women over his daughter. And that's how I portrayed it unfairly at the time, because I was just angry and hurt. And that's kind of what I was focusing on. And I acknowledge now that that was very unfair for me to put that narrative into play, because the world's way more complex than that. But it was so hard going away from it that, like, again, maybe my coping mechanism is just quitting, because I was like, I'm done with finance. I'm not going to do this anymore. I don't care for your approval any longer. Like, I see what you're doing as somewhat hurtful, because you're upholding this organization that hurts women, and I'm a woman, so therefore it hurts me. And so I stopped doing finance, and I haven't done anything finance related since. I didn't go on an internship I was supposed to, kind of just like turned away from that entirely and started pursuing something different. And I stopped using those contacts because I didn't want anything to do with my dad for a while, or anything to do with what I thought he embodied as not only a high outstanding member of the church, but also as an investor for Ensign Peak, because you're financially enabling this organization to continue existing. And that was really hard. And it's still really hard for me. And we're repairing the relationship slowly, but it's such complex feelings to exist in one person that they're complex feelings, and people are complex. And that's the story I want to tell, is that he's complex, I'm complex, our relationship's complex, and we need to deal with that. But it's hard and it's messy, and we went through good times and bad times, and that's certainly a bad time.
I mean, on the one hand, your best friend, so to speak, he's kind and loving. He's been super supportive of you. And people are allowed to have their personal beliefs, right? Like all over the world, people have their personal beliefs. That's kind of one hand. And then on the other hand, and you love him. And then on the other hand, he is funding the harm and the abuse from your perspective at that point.
Right.
But what a tragic thing to see a religion, a set of beliefs, shatter the status of your relationship at that point.
Right.
It seems tragic.
And it was really tragic. And I think we all go through the 7 stages of mourning when you go through this like separation from this belief that you hold so fundamentally. And but it led to some good things, right? So like I stopped pursuing finance. My husband and I left Utah because I was like, this isn't the place. Women aren't respected here. I need to get out to a place where I think I can be a fully formed person. And so we left Utah and like separated, had to physically separate from my family to feel kind of some sort of relief or a breath of fresh air for a second.
But just to be clear, you didn't just lose your faith, you lost the relationship you had with your dad at the time, which is a double devastation.
Right, absolutely. And I think that's like the bigger hurt, honestly, and the bigger heartbreak. I feel like that would probably be like, you know, Rylee talked about her heartbreak. You know, I feel like that would be like one of my heartbreaks is losing that relationship that I had, and like how much I put my dad on a pedestal, right? That hero that like was helping me out so much and could do so many things and was so powerful and was so cool, you know, and taught me to be a cool Mormon and to separate the religion from the culture. And he taught me so many incredible things. He taught me to read, and he, you know, and to be like, oh, but it's encapsulated in this thing that I just think is so ugly and so hard to be around that I just can't be around it anymore. And so I had to get away.
Like I know David Nielsen just loves your dad too. I'm guessing he's just an amazing human in just so many ways. I'm trying to put my brain in that spot of you starting to feel like he's not the enemy, but like supporting the enemy. Like that's, I've never had that happen personally, I don't think, where someone I loved, I had that shift of perspective about them from they're amazing to they're sleeping with the enemy. I don't even know that I know what that's like, because I was the first in my family to lose my faith, I guess.
I feel like there's like a double whammy in sorts, because I feel like I could like, it's the fact that like he still chooses to believe in an organization that's an unapologetic patriarchy. That's like the first, you know, that's the right hook, right? And then the left hook is that not only does he believe in it, but it's his job, right? Like he's helping enable the mission. So it's more than just a belief at that point. And so we have right hook, left hook, and that's hard to go through both of those at the exact same time. a lot harder than I think if it was just a belief, then I'd be like, okay, you can have your beliefs. Yeah. I suppose.
And Margie, you're nodding. Do you want to share? I'm curious what you're thinking and feeling, because you seem to be really vibing with this part of the story.
Just feeling very much for how you're describing grief and how loss is showing up, and why it's complicated grief, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And also just the feeling of like reaching a point where maybe your own ideas have evolved enough to be your own, and you're standing in your own space and feeling disappointed by someone that you like, just like you hold that younger version of you still. You're older, but like your 4-year-old self and how you viewed your dad still lives in you somewhere, and to hold that, and also at the same time to feel sort of like disappointed that, I mean, on a level, his beliefs, yes, but also his privilege blinds him to seeing that his set of beliefs and his involvement work-wise with an organization, right, that it harms you, that it like limits you, and that it actively like,
harmed and harms, right?
Yes, because we know those narratives and conditionings, even if we believe differently, oftentimes they live on in us, right? Like they still come up for us, even if rationally we're in a new place and you'd say, I don't believe, that women should be small. But we're conditioned for years and years and years. And so sometimes we show up still. And you know what I mean? And that's what's hard when it's your dad. When it's your dad, you're like, fight for me. Like, why doesn't this bother you?
Choose me.
Like, it hurts me.
Choose me.
Right?
Yeah.
And yes, it's not happening to you, but why isn't it enough that it's happening to me or to us? Fight for that, Feel for that. Why don't you feel for that? Right?
I resonate that. Like
that's exactly
your
the
words,
anger.
I exactly encapsulate it. It's like, pick me. This hurts me. Don't you see how bad it's hurting me? And you're still choosing that.
Yeah. I've heard it said once that like privilege is thinking a problem isn't a problem because it's not your problem. And so I think like in a lot of ways, I think my dad struggles to understand why like the feministic hangups were so hard for JoCee, but how could he understand that lived experience and all of those microaggressions that JoCee experienced and the internalized cultural shift? Because that wouldn't have happened to him, even though he knew on a certain level it was going to happen, right? He prepared her. JoCee, we're going to talk to, our elite, prestigious Mormon friends, and like there might be something said offhand about it when you're going to get married and who, and when you're going to start having babies and stuff. He knew enough to know that that existed within the system, but when you're not dealing with that every day and internalizing it the way that JoCee did, the way that I did, you struggle to understand. I mean, same thing where like maybe in his mind, my reaction to the Utah Mormons was an outsized reaction because like it wasn't his problem, right?
He was living the Utah dream when he moved here, right?
Yeah, and he already knew. He knew what it was going to, and didn't anticipate how much it would hurt us personally. And I think that's where the cognitive dissonance maybe struggles for him. It's like, wow, you were taking it really personally. And it's like, because this is personal for me, because this is my experience. Like you talk to, see me as a person, see me as that my reality matters. Just because it doesn't match your reality exactly, this is my experience and I need you to see me. And even though we were still able to have conversations and again, I decided to distance myself from the family, but when I needed him, I knew that I could call and I could always go back, but it just becomes that much more layered and confusing when you think, God, why do we have to participate in this when it's causing different people problems and hurt the entire time? We always knew that the church caused my mom a lot of problems, be it social anxiety, be it her outspoken disagreements with polygamy, be, all of these judgments that we felt, that we didn't feel accepted moving into Utah, that, we felt a lot of this judgment. Like, why do we still have to operate within this system of pain with an added layer of, and you seem so complicit in this organization that causes pain for so many people, so much so that you make them an inordinate amount of money and continue to allow the power and influence to continue to openly be able to discriminate against people. I mean, you went to BYU. You know that they use the term religious freedom to discriminate against the LGBTQ community or whatever. I know that you see these things. How can you still be complicit in this system? So much so that unbelievable amount of power and money, I know that you directly accumulated to help this organization continue to hurt other people. How can you not see that it's hurting your own family?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's this quote in Scarface, a movie with Al Pacino, where he basically says, first you get the money, then you get the power. Once you get the power, then you get the women. But the idea is that it starts with money.
Yeah.
So a really difficult thing that I'm wondering if you both feel is without the massive wealth that Ensign Peak helps accumulate for the church doesn't have the power to do as much harm as they do. So not to pick on your dad, because it's systems, not people, and he's as much of a victim as anybody in a way. But in a sense, in a very real sense, your dad is helping fund the harm that the church causes people.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's hard to separate, like there's no way to separate that. Yeah.
And this is why I need advice from Gerardo, right? How does he separate, his love for his dad versus like the banister that he upholds that like just goes against him fundamentally? I struggle with it constantly. Like, I love my dad. I want to love my dad. I want to have a relationship with my dad. I don't want to have a broken family, but this is hurting and it's not working for me.
It's so hard.
I'm so sorry. And again, I know your dad's a great dad. Your mom's a great mom,
They are. And that's like what makes it, I don't know. That's what makes it confusing.
That's the complicated,
right? That's why it's so complicated.
And those two things, as you keep saying, in many ways they were great parents and they caused harm. And those two things make it super hard to reconcile.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
They both exist and they're both true. Yeah.
Right.
I'm seeing this meme going around on Instagram right now that sometimes ambiguous relationships are more traumatic than clearly abusive relationships, because there's this love-hate dynamic or this love-abuse or soft abuse dynamic that the love allows you to stay close and be connected and want to make it work, but then the abuse, and I'm not saying your dad's abusive, but do you see what I'm saying?
Or the harm.
Sometimes these ambiguous relationships end up causing more harm than the ones that are just outright clearly abusive and you know the boundary of the people, or you just give up, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then another factor into that equation is that, and by the way, there's $100+ billion involved. Like, it just becomes like really overwhelming really, really quickly. And confusing.
But, I mean, I don't want to definitely turn away from the word abuse for sure, right? Like, but it's so confusing and so hard. And
well, cover up for abuse. I mean, that was the last one that like really where I thought if dad's gonna maybe find a way to transition out of this, I thought for sure the AP story of this, because there's no way to apologize that one away.
The sexual abuse,
the systemic cover-up of child and teen sexual abuse within Mormonism.
How do you justify that? You cannot. It is inexcusable. And that's where it becomes really tricky, because it's like, Dad, there's a systemic organization here that is not in obscure ways, not in intangible ways, but in direct lived ways from the AP, like, this is a credible source. This is well documented. It happened. You cannot explain this away. You cannot apologize this away. There has been cover-ups that the church has done for sexual abuse within the system. And by the way, you're able to get away with that because you have tithing money that can pay for people's litigation. I mean, there's just no way to explain that one away. I mean, like, for me, I thought that for sure. It's been a long time since but that one was emotional. Like, I was very worked up for a long time over that because we're talking about the abuse of children. I mean, explain to me how there's enough good in the world that this organization does that can justify complicity in that story. Yeah.
And what's hard is how has the church survived? I'm told by inside sources that Curtin McConkie, an abuse is reported to Curtin McConkie hourly from somewhere around the world. Every hour of a professional working week, a new case of sexual abuse is reported to Curtin McConkie. That's how prevalent child and teen sexual abuse is within Mormonism. And we all know with the Boy Scouts of America that the church was willing to pay $750 million towards a Boy Scouts of America abuse case because 70,000 Mormon boys were sexually abused in the Mormon Boy Scout troops. How does any institution survive and thrive with that legacy of abuse? There's one answer. A crap ton of money to pay a crap ton of lawyers and to pay off and to silence a crap ton of abuse victims. Right?
Absolutely.
And so it's the money that's always the enabler. Not to pick on anyone, but that's what's hard. It's the money that's the enabler.
Yeah, that there's a two-tier justice system is absolutely the truth. And you have enough money to get yourself out of certain situations. And we see the church do this again and again and again. And by the way, which church is this? The Church of Jesus Christ. I don't know how you can sit with that, or at least I can't anymore. And the other thing that sucks is I know that it causes the members themselves pain. And it's not fair to ask believing members who get so much value from this church to have to be okay with the Church of Jesus Christ, the one true church of Jesus here on earth, to act and behave in those ways.
Yeah. So, JoCee, this part 2 is your story. How do you want to kind of like wrap up all these sentiments? Because emotions just got really hot, right?
Yeah, emotions did get hot. What are the options to wrap it up? Like, what do people say? Do they bear their testimony at the end? Do we do a stand up, Kimra?
So where do things stand now? Here's what I wanted to ask. Did you ever go to Rylee, JoCee, and say, you were right, I'm so sorry? Was there ever that conversation or not?
There should have been. I don't think there ever was a direct, you were right. Like, wow.
I think of Portland. I think of when we met in Portland.
We went to Portland and we got a bottle of wine, and it was the first time us sisters have ever had a bottle of wine together, and we just sit the entire night and we just talked it out. And I rented an Airbnb, and we were there for 2 days, and we just talked the entire time and kind of went through this. And that's kind of when we came back together as friends, and our friendship and our current relationship started was after Portland and that bottle of wine, and we just had a great evening.
Yeah. Well, now that I think about it, I mean, I tried to show up for JoCee and rebuild once I kind of saw what was happening. I mean, you saw what was happening. You could see it from a mile away. But there wasn't a coming to me, but her husband did provide a way that we could talk about these things, because he asked me a lot of questions, quite frankly. He asked me a lot of questions about my experience, and so I'd go and hang out with them, and Jaden would ask me things, and then we were able to have these conversations about Mormonism and what it meant to be Mormonism. So yeah, a lot of that started happening when JoCee was with her current partner. And then when she got married, because again, I knew that my mom has a certain amount of social anxiety. I was her maid of honor, and I tried to show up in every way that I could for JoCee's wedding and make it this big, amazing day. You're right, but like I did your wedding video for you. I like tried to make everything perfect. I tried to be there. And so I was just trying to show JoCee, I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. I'm here for you. When you're ready to talk, when you're ready to talk about things, let's talk about things. And so when she moved to Seattle, ironically, around the same time I moved to Oregon, the middle meeting point for us was Portland. And I was like, hey, Jo, why don't we do a weekend together in Portland? We got that bottle of wine, and JoCee was able to be open and vulnerable and honest about how I hurt her directly and indirectly in our childhood. That I hurt her, right? That my actions hurt her. Some things like, I stole her clothes, and that was, typical sister stuff, but also that she spoke to, she felt like she didn't get the resources and the attention that she deserved from my parents and support in these really vulnerable years when she was going through her own shit so silently and with a brave face, because my parents' attention was turned on me because I was not suffering silently. I was very, outward about everything. And so that directly and indirectly hurt her, cost her a lot, and how she hated me and resented me. And we were able to kind of get that through. And I needed to hear it. I needed to hear directly from her lived experience. And then I feel like I just tried to tell you that I loved you, and that I always loved you, and that I was sorry that this pain that I was making decisions that I didn't think extended outside of myself, but of course they did, and own up to the pain that I caused. And then I think from there we were able to, with the social lubricant of a bottle of wine, and we were able to have, like, to me, that was a monumental moment for me, is having like a heart to heart where I feel like my sister could be honest about her experiences with me. And from that place, we were able to heal and build and rebuild. Mm-hmm.
Rebuild, I think, a very great friendship and sistership in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good place to end it. And I guess where we're at with the family, it's hard. I know that this podcast will be hard.
Are y'all estranged from your parents, or not at all?
Not.
You were just in London with your dad, right?
And I was just in Israel
JoCee was
with
just
mine.
in Jerusalem with my dad.
Yeah, with my dad. So no, the relationship's healing. I know that this podcast will be hard. If they choose to hear it, if they choose not to, it'll be a hard and it'll be a bump, but hopefully it's one that enables future healing or tears off the Band-Aid or fixes the scars that were there previously. But we're not actively estranged from them. We talk pretty openly and often. And I hope, in my true desire, and whether or not my dad believes this or not, I want to have a relationship, and I want to have a full and healthy and healed family. So that's hopefully what we can build up to in the future.
Yeah. And I know that he wants a relationship.
He wants that too.
Yeah. And I think the fact that we haven't given up on it yet, I wish I could, maybe all of this would still happen even if like Mormonism was out of the picture. We're all kind of highly intelligent, neurotic, quite frankly, individuals who I think would be like competitive and at each other's throats. And I don't know, maybe just like I always struggled because Mormon families are all supposed to be such happy families, and my family dynamics always, right? That sounds maybe superficial. I see Margie shaking her head because like that's probably a superficial outward thing that you see, but I envied that. I felt like I saw like these like perfect Utah Mormon families that were all happy and everyone got along and everything else, and thought, why is that not my family, and why can't we fit into that? And it was for me impossible to not see Mormonism as a giant part of that equation, just because it caused so much disruption and tension between everyone. But we haven't quit yet. God damn it.
That's beautiful.
And I know my dad will never give up on me, and I don't think we might take breaks, but I'm never going to give up on him and the family either. So
well said.
And just, it's such a crazy world because you're both brilliant, talented, articulate, thoughtful, caring, ethical humans by my estimation. Margie's nodding. And so, like, in a world that makes sense to me, that's enough for your parents. It's like, look, it should be in my world. Rylee was like the first blow, but now JoCee too. All right, I'm listening, I'm digging in, and okay, clearly it's over. We're out. This isn't true, and we're doing harm. We're enabling harm, and we're done with the church. But that's not how the world works, is it? That's not how faith works, is it?
Mm-hmm. And I'm not holding out hope for that, and I think what needs to happen is that we need to get better at allowing people to have their beliefs and not take it personally, and I guess maybe create enough cognitive dissonance to I can love my dad and I can love the sinner and hate the sin, right? I can love my dad and hate where he works.
I can love the believer even if I don't like the belief.
Right.
I love the turn. I love how you guys turn that around. All right. Well, JoCee, thank you so much for you sharing your story. We went 2 hours and 44 minutes. What was yours?
Forever, it seems. Forever. But not nearly as interesting as JoCee's beautiful feminist awakening.
So well spoken.
No, this was courageous and powerful and insightful. And so, JoCee, thank you so much for being willing to share your story.
So vulnerable.
Absolutely.
And Rylee, thank you for your input as well. It's been really, really healing.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Powerful. And again, systems, not people. Love to, I don't even know, obviously, Jeffrey or Roxanne Porter, but love to you guys. It's about the system. You guys are awesome. And thanks for being good sports and supporting your daughters again.
Yeah.
Sharing their stories and their truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's already like 7:30 p.m. here. We've been going all day. And we still haven't talked about really Ensign Peak. So
let's talk about that next.
We're going to end this part 2. And then thank you for joining us. Margie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's past your work time, so we may not get you for part 3, but it's been lovely to have you, and thank you so much
Yeah, I'm so glad.
for being a part.
Yeah, thank you. Always
pleasure.
appreciate your input.
Yeah. All right. And don't go away. Come right back, hopefully, for part 3. I don't know when we're going to record it, but come back for part 3 because we still want to hear Rylee and JoCee Porter talk about their perspective about Ensign Peak as the daughters of an Ensign Peak executive. That'll be part 3 if we end up recording it. So hope to see you back super soon. Thanks for joining us on Mormon Stories. Be good to each other and be kind to each other. And we'll see you for the next episode. Take care, everybody.